I'll be talking about relations with a minor, so I apologize in advance if it's triggering for some people. I'm 30 years old and I'm from Florida. I'll be going by the name Solace for privacy reasons. The story takes place in 2009 back in the MySpace days, and it has still left a longing effect on me 14 years later. I was 16 going to Largo High, and up until this point I had only dated 2 friends for a short period before this situation. As someone who felt different and an outcast, I was bullied and always wanted to have a best friend and long relationship. I thought I'd honestly never get one. Unfortunately, this was the first 5-year-plus experience. I wish it never happened. I used to be on MySpace all the time on certain bands' pages looking at all their photos, which is when I found out certain bands' pages, if you scrolled down, had a tiny box called Meebo where you could chat with people. I was always on Paramore's page, and I talked there daily. After a while, I met this guy named Ryan. We talked a lot about music, the bands we liked, and we even recommended bands to each other. Eventually, we had started dating and I was ecstatic. Even though it was a long distance thing, I didn't care. The problem? He was 24. I used to question the 8 years difference at that time, and he would always tell me, age is just a number. That or, well, you can't help who you fall in love with. I started believing it. As time progressed, sexual conversations happened. Over the phone stuff happened. Nudes happened. That makes me so nauseous to think about on now. Well, fast forward about 5 years. I'm 21 and I found out he was not the person in the pictures he sent, and yet I still stayed. Fast forward a few months, he gives me a password for his Facebook to help fix it. I thought that maybe it would be the same password for his email since I had this gut feeling that he might be cheating. It was the same. I saw a flood of emails from random people. It was all nudes. Pictures of teenage girls my age, women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and the highest I saw was 60-something. I don't remember how many images and things I've seen. I also saw that he made a Meet Me account using the same copied and pasted message of his name looking for a relationship and using his mother's disease for sympathy. It was fucking disgusting. The feeling of being cheated on with one person hurts, but seeing it being well over 50+ people, I was broken. It put me in a deep depressive state where I stayed home from my GED classes, slept all day, and barely even ate. I tried confronting him and he denied that whole fucking thing, so I had stopped communicating for a while at this point. Later down the line, a female saw his Facebook that he had me in his relationship status, and she reached out. Apparently, while I was with him, not only was he soliciting nudes from girls and women, but he was also having an in-person relationship the whole time. She said the times I've called, he said I was a friend while they were in bed together. I told her about everything. The nudes, all of it. She said that she was going to confront him, and she called me back a few days later saying, "Well, I still love him and I'm staying with him. Don't bother our relationship." All I ever wanted during that was someone to believe and acknowledge what was happening, that it was wrong. It made me feel crazy and alone. The worst problem after all this time? My parents knew. They never even stopped it. My mom caught me sending nudes and got mad at me mostly. Never once did she go after him. And what makes it hurt the most? My mom tells me that's the reason for my dad's past abuse then and why he treats me the way he does now, because my mom didn't step in and do anything. If he knew and didn't stop it either, that makes him just as bad as her. At the present moment, I've healed most of my feelings from that time. I'm in a better state mentally, even though other traumatic events happened after that. Those stories will be for another day. I want to say to myself and to anyone else who's experienced something like this, it is not your fault, ever. We were children and we needed protection. We think we know everything at those ages, but we don't. That's where parents need to step in. Hell, anyone who's around and sees and hears needs to step in. Do something. As for this piece of shit, if you happen to hear this, Ryan, I hope you fucking rot for all the disgusting shit you did, you vile pedo. I used to love Tumblr. It has a well-deserved reputation for being a crazy website, but I used to be such a Tumblr girl from 2012 to 2014. When I was 14, it was 2013. I was a bit of an emo teenager. I'd go on there and reblog toxic posts romanticizing depression. It was a big thing back then, and although the posts were toxic, they did help me process my own emotions. I was struggling at the time because I was bullied in school for having a large nose by a group of boys. I felt so ugly, and they really knocked my confidence, which was already low. I guess this made me vulnerable, but ultimately what ended up happening was not the fault of my bullies. As I said, I was 14 when this took place. I followed a blog on there that posted stuff I liked. This person followed me back and we became mutuals, reblogging each other's stuff. One day he sent me a post that I shared and said something about it, and I replied. Conversation didn't begin right away. It was these types of interactions at first before we started to properly talk. We slowly began getting to know each other. It was a guy who I'll call Ethan. He told me he was 18 and I was honest about being 14. I thought he wouldn't want to talk to me anymore, but he didn't even care about my age. I remember that he told me that he was shocked because I seemed wise beyond my years based on my posts. I know that's stupid, but I didn't realize how predatory this was at the time. As time went on, we continued to talk. He told me about where he was from. He told me that he lived in the eastern United States, and I lived in Canada. I thought he was really cool. He told me that he was in college studying pharmacy, and he told me about his interests. I've always really loved smart guys, and I thought he was so smart for doing pharmacy. He also told me that he loved poetry and listened to Lana Del Rey. I posted about Lana Del Rey on my blog, and I'd share quotes all the time. I wonder now if he made that up to just lure me in. He claimed he could play guitar and piano, and that he was starting a band with his college roommates. This was swoon-worthy to me. I told him about myself too, my interests, and he seemed to love similar things as me. Again, I do wonder if he just studied my blog to get a feel for my interests. I remember opening up to him after talking to him for like 2 months. I had a really hard day in school, and I told him I was being bullied, revealing all of the details. It all came pouring out. He comforted me, and I'd never experienced that before. He seemed like he really understood. He shared his own experience of being bullied for having braces and being viewed as a nerd. He said it would be okay because now he was in college and doing well for himself, but that his bullies were all high school dropouts. I believed him, and talking to him felt like a weight was now lifted off my shoulders. Up until this point, we had never seen photos of each other. Due to the nature of my bullying, he assured me that I wasn't ugly, and he said he was willing to bet my nose wasn't that big at all. He ended up joking that he probably looked worthy of being bullied, but not me, and this ended up with him sending me a selfie. When I saw him, my heart honestly skipped a beat. I felt butterflies in my stomach. I thought he was attractive, and I suddenly felt really nervous. I remember telling him there was nothing wrong with how he looked, and he told me that he felt that way about me too, despite not having even seen me. He then started to say that he bet that I was pretty, and the boys bullying me probably liked me and just couldn't cope with how they felt. It felt like he was nudging me to send a photo. I was nervous, but I decided to just take one and send it. It took me like half an hour to get one I was satisfied with. I remember sending it and feeling like it was too good to be true, that this cool, hot 18-year-old guy was talking to little old me. He didn't reply for a while, and honestly, I was scared that he saw my photo and was repulsed. Then he responded, and I still remember it word for word. He literally said, "Wow, I'm always right. You are gorgeous." I remember reading his words over and over, and I felt like I was flying through the sky. I'd never been complimented like that before. My self-esteem was in tatters, and here was this older boy calling me gorgeous. I was so flattered and I felt so special. I remember I told him that he didn't mean that, but he told me that he did and that I was so gorgeous. I couldn't help but blush and the butterflies in my stomach intensified. After that, I felt closer to him. He encouraged me to stand up to my bullies, and he began complimenting me all the time. He started sending me random photos as he went about his day, like photos of him brushing his teeth in the morning standing at the mirror. I remember that he gave me a bedroom tour, and I gave him a tour of my room too. It must sound so silly, but thinking back to this bothers me. Ethan knew my age, and it must have been undeniable when he saw my bedroom. It really bothers me to think about things like that. Sometimes more so than the objectively worse things. Our chat started to shift, but it sort of felt like a natural progression. Obviously it wasn't, but I thought it was normal. Ethan started to ask if I'd ever had a boyfriend, ever kissed a boy, the usual. The answer was no, and he told me that he was shocked to hear that. I asked why, and he said that I was way too pretty to be single, and that he'd date me in a heartbeat. That made my heart skip a beat. I remember he asked if I had any idea what I did to him, and I didn't know what he meant, so I asked what he meant. He told me that I drove him crazy, and he sent a winky face. I didn't realize how sexual this was at the time, but I knew that he had to be saying that he liked me. At the same time, my self-esteem issues had me second-guessing if he really did like me or if I was just being dumb and misinterpreting him. After this, things only got more inappropriate. I didn't understand at the time that it was wrong, but it did feel wrong sometimes, which I'll get into. He ended up telling me a few mornings later that he woke up hard because of me. I knew what he meant, and it made me feel really embarrassed and uncomfortable. I had school, and I didn't reply because I didn't really know what to say to that. When I got home from school, he'd sent me 2 messages, both basically saying he was sorry if he made me uncomfortable. I replied back that it was okay. He told me that he only told me because he thought he could tell me anything, and I told him he could. I now know that this was him trying to be manipulative, but at the time I couldn't see it. The next morning, he messaged me again telling me the same thing had happened. This time I replied back saying, "Yeah," because I felt like I shouldn't ignore him, but it still made me uncomfortable. He replied saying yeah, and that he just couldn't stop thinking about me, even in his dreams. I thought this was sweet, and I told him that I thought about him all the time too. He didn't say anything sexual for a few days. That weekend we were talking at night, and he told me that he was probably going to wake up hard in the morning because he was talking to me. I didn't know what to say. I felt uncomfortable and awkward. Well, he then asked me if he turned me on, and if I touched myself and thought about him. This embarrassed me because I was only 14 and I'd never spoken to anyone like that before. I told him that I felt embarrassed talking about that, and I remember he apologized and said that he thought I was more mature. That made me feel like I was being stupid, and I was also scared of losing him, so I decided to engage in the conversation. I told myself this was normal and this is just what adults did, and that I was mature enough for it. Ethan basically told me that he liked my responses, and he said I was hot. I felt really awkward. I liked Ethan, and how I was feeling confused me. I cared about him and liked him, but I knew deep down something was up. I was too young for this, and I resented the fact that I couldn't feel more like an adult like him. The next part is really gross to say, but he told me that he wanted to eat me out. I didn't know what this meant. I knew about sex, but I didn't really understand all the slang. And again, I was only 14 years old. I admitted to not knowing what he meant, and he said it was something that boys did when they love a girl. I asked him if he loved me, completely disregarding everything else, and he said he did. It makes me cringe so badly, but I really believed it. I was so clueless. He sent me a gift through a Tumblr of a woman receiving oral sex, and he said again that he wanted to do that to me. I felt embarrassed like I often did. I couldn't imagine letting him do that to me. From this day on, he kept bringing up how much he wanted to do it, and I just felt so embarrassed. I couldn't understand what was wrong with me. I kept thinking that I should be alright with it, but it just didn't feel right. Ethan started posting NSFW gifs on his Tumblr. At least once a day he'd post something, and he'd put really cringy shit in the tags like, "Thinking about my girl." I knew it was aimed at me, and it made me feel uncomfortable. Some of the gifs were pretty intense, and it scared me. Ethan kept telling me that I was so mature for my age, and I was so hot, and he couldn't get enough of me. One night, he had started telling me all the stuff he wanted to do to me, and it was like virtual sex, as if he was really doing it. He would say to picture him doing X, Y, and Z, and I didn't know what to do. I partook in it, and it makes me cringe now. I didn't know what else to do other than go along with it because I didn't want to seem immature. Plus, I felt like I really loved Ethan, and I wanted to make him happy. I wanted to be with him, but I just wasn't ready for all this quite yet. When he started asking for photos of me in compromising positions, it was the beginning of the end. I said no because there was no way I could do that. Ethan wasn't understanding. He tried to pressure me. He told me that I needed to give him something since he couldn't be with me in person. And didn't I love him? Didn't I understand how much it hurt him not to be able to be with me? He said those things and more. I kept saying no, and Ethan wouldn't talk to me. I realized that I felt relieved to not be talking to him anymore. 2 weeks passed, and although I missed him, the relief I felt was telling me something was wrong. He finally messaged me, and he was acting like nothing had happened between us. Despite part of me not wanting to engage, I had started talking to him again. It didn't take him long to get sexual with me again. He started calling me sexy and started telling me he wanted me so bad, etc. I decided to tell him how I was feeling. I told him that I really loved him, but I felt like our relationship was going too quick. I wrote a really long message, and I really thought it was reasonable. But when I sent it, he didn't reply for a long time. The next day, he deactivated his account. I was devastated. The years passed, and I never told anyone. I still haven't to this day. When I got my first boyfriend, I was 16, and everything just felt natural with him. I guess it was then that I started to realize Ethan was weird, but it wasn't until I was 18 when it fully hit me. I couldn't help but look at 14-year-olds and see how young they are. I thought about Ethan and how I could never be attracted to a 14-year-old, yet he was attracted to me. I decided I had to push this down because I wasn't ready to confront it properly. But it wasn't easy to ignore, and I found myself thinking about it all the time. Nowadays, it isn't on my mind so much, but things bring it to the surface, and then I push it back down again. I'm embarrassed by the entire thing. I wouldn't say the experience traumatized me, but it definitely bothers me. Ethan was clearly a pedophile, and it scares me to think that he's out there hiding in plain sight. He isn't a 40-year-old grungy man. I can't help but think about him after all this time. I don't know what I should say to end this story other than I really hope anyone listening takes away a valuable lesson, which is to never talk to strangers online, especially those who are older when you're a child, and never talk to those who make you uncomfortable. It's really disgusting that he was talking to me about how he was, and he was clearly a predator. All I can say is that it still really bothers me to this day, and I suppose it always will. I just woke up in the middle of the night remembering this, and I needed to get it off my chest. When I was about 16, my dad, brothers, and I lived in an old rundown house in the middle of nowhere. It was a private rental. My brother would do work for the landlord to pay our rent. Our landlord never came off as particularly creepy, but that could be because I rarely went outside whenever he came over to talk to my dad, and he wouldn't dare do anything in front of our dad. I was home alone one day. My dad and brothers went out somewhere, but I don't remember. I had my dog in a fenced-in yard outside, but that was it. I was in my room doing whatever I was doing, probably playing The Sims 2. We lived in the middle of nowhere, and there was a long driveway which the window of my bedroom directly faced. I could see or hear someone driving up the driveway. I saw a car that wasn't my dad's and immediately freaked out. I ran and shut all the blinds in the house, turned off all the lights, and checked to make sure the doors were locked. It was our landlord. He lived next door, about 2 miles away from our house, and yes, that was the closest house. This wasn't the first time he'd come here unexpectedly. It happened twice before, and both times I was home alone. Those first 2 times he was only there for about 10 minutes, walking around the outside of the house and then quickly leaving. But this time was different. I grabbed a big kitchen knife and hid under the kitchen table. I had heard him pull up outside and open our front gate. My dog outside was going crazy and barking. I heard him yell, "Oh, shut the hell up, you mutt!" I could hear his footsteps walking up to the door. He tried to open the front door, and I was freaking out. At this point, I texted my dad. He was coming straight home, but they'd still be like an hour. He continued to walk around outside of our house, trying to peek into each window. The house is old and has 3 doors that you can enter from the outside. He tried to open all 3 of them. I thought maybe he didn't know I was home. Maybe the last 2 times were just a coincidence. But he had started saying things, including calling out my name. He knew I was home alone. I couldn't hear what else he was saying through the double brick walls, but I quietly creeped through the house, following his voice up and down the hallway. I was trying to hear what he was saying. That's when he said something I'll never forget. "I'm going to burn down the house, but I'll let you out first." Of course, I didn't take him seriously, which scares me even more. He wanted me to come out. He wanted me to take this threat seriously. That's the part that gets me. I know exactly what would have happened if I had believed him, and my life would have been completely different. He was there for at least 30 minutes, maybe even closer to an hour. He was persistent. He eventually left before my dad came home. I told him everything and we moved out soon after. I still don't know how he knew I was home alone. My dad never saw him on the way driving out. So he knew my dad was gone, but how did he know I wasn't with him? I'm a female in my early 20s. I live alone with my mom in a relatively nice area in a section of the house our friend owns. I have some anxiety issues from a stalking incident in a prior area of town. So sometimes paranoia gets me, but I'm able to use logic to reason my way out of it 99% of the time. Our friend frequently travels and my mom has had health issues recently. Every person who lives here has to go outside and go through storm doors to the basement to access the laundry, and we have motion sensors through the basement and yard to help us see as we're walking. My front door has a small window with a broken blind or 2, so there's small peepholes. All of this is relevant information. Now on to what just happened about an hour ago, and I'm still shaking a bit from it. Our housemate is traveling, and my mom fell ill earlier. I told her to go to an emergency room and make sure nothing serious was happening, and I was left by myself, which isn't too uncommon. I'd been doing my normal routines when I remembered there was laundry in the dryer, so I got up and walked down my steps into the basement since I had left the storm doors open. Now is where you'd think the story would start. But surprisingly, my laundry routine went fine, and I closed the storm doors and proceeded back up the stairs to my section of the home. I had to pee, so the second I closed the door, I placed the bin down and had the thought to lock my door tonight. Something I don't tend to do because my mom is a smoker, and hearing the locks at night is very loud and will wake me up. I didn't, which could have been a huge mistake. I used the bathroom and ended up taking longer than I needed to, scrolling around on social media. I remember all the clean clothes, so I had stripped mostly naked besides underwear, and I threw on a pair of shorts. And as I grabbed a shirt to throw on, my heart, brain, gut, and everything screams, "Door, now, locks." In that brief second, thankfully my body responded and took the 2 steps forward to the door. I then tried to lock the door, but the knob wouldn't move. That only ever happens if the knob is being turned, and I know for a fact that I wasn't turning it. I locked the secondary lock and slammed my back into the door, waiting a minute to test the doorknob lock again, hoping it would work. Thankfully this time it did, and while I hadn't noticed at first, the motion sensor light had activated far too long after I was already inside for me to have done it. And they're such shitty lights I have to wave my hands in front of them occasionally to activate, so I'm 95% sure someone else was out there. I sat with my back to the door for God knows how long before I then got up and turned most of the lights out and then grabbed a knife that I'll have next to me all night now. I looked out both windows that faced that direction after a while and saw nothing, luckily, because I don't know what I would have done. So yeah, to whoever was turning the doorknob outside of the house, I really hope you don't come back. One evening, I was out in Lacey, Washington to pick up a handgun that I had recently purchased for protection. Contrary to the pickup status both online and sent to my email, the store didn't have it in stock yet and told me to come back in another week. I lived about an hour from Lacey at the time, and when I had gotten there, evening rush hour was just beginning to become unbearable. I didn't want to drive all the way back home just yet, as it would add an additional hour to my already long commute. Side note, the car I was driving belonged to my dad, and I was just borrowing it until I had enough money saved up for a new car after my beloved Honda had broken down just the previous year. I killed some time bumming around the store I had purchased my firearm from, then decided to drive over to the nearest coffee shop. It was a newly built cabin-style cafe with a modern twist. The barista handed me my 16-ounce dirty chai, and I walked back out to my car. I then drove to a gas station around the corner, still trying to kill some time until traffic thinned out. The car didn't need gas, so I pulled into a parking spot right at the corner of the 4-way street block the gas station was on. I turned off the engine, stepped outside, and lit up a smoke, leaning against the driver's side door so as to not stink up the interior. The weather was overcast and drizzly, but not overly cold. It was now dusk and most daylight had disappeared. The stoplights in the intersection were diffused by the late autumn mist. I watched them flicker from green to yellow to red, and again as the traffic was orchestrated accordingly. Zoned out by the lights and being generally lost in thought while enjoying my coffee and smoke, I didn't notice the man walking toward me until he was already halfway across the street. He was white, average height, and strawberry blonde, maybe in his mid-20s. He definitely hadn't changed his clothes in a good while, and he carried a backpack, I assumed to be full of the few belongings that he had. He didn't smell, but he looked raggedy and unkempt. My immediate thought was that drugs were likely a part of his habitual lifestyle. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I'm always cautious having grown up in the suburbs of Seattle. The man finished crossing the street, awkwardly limping toward my car, maintaining eye contact and a winced grin. I locked my car out of caution, but I remained outside smoking casually. Normally, I'm not a social person, but I don't go out of my way to be unpleasant either. He approached me and he stood about 10 feet away when he then said, "Hello there," and asked if I had a light. I complied hesitantly, but saw no harm in meeting his simple request. Taking 2 steps forward, I lit a cigarette which he was holding out toward me while approaching. He attempted to make small talk, weaving in hints that he had just gotten off the bus and still needed to get down the road another block. Somewhere in his poorly crafted sob story, he had stopped himself mid-sentence like a bad actor and pretended to be struck by an epiphany. "Hey, would you mind dropping me off down the road? It's not that far." I apologized and said I couldn't help because it was my dad's car and not my own, and I didn't feel comfortable without my father's permission. Some stupid yet plausible excuse which I came up with on the spot. Mr. Unkempt did not like my answer, and his smile immediately turned tense and flatlined. Clearly upset, he became more insistent. "Oh, come on, but it's just down the road," he whined. "Come on, man, my leg is killing me, and it wouldn't even be that far for you. I'll give you a cigarette." His persistence and sudden burst of hostility made my hair stand up. I then firmly said, "No, man, I'm sorry, I can't help you. It's my dad's car and he has set rules." Again, absolute bullshit. With about 10 years of hospitality under my belt, I immediately offered him alternate logical ideas of what he could do to get to where he needed to be. I even mentioned maybe someone in the gas station we were waiting outside of could help him out or call him a ride. Each word I said made him increasingly irate, and he began curling his fingers into fists, not in a threatening way, but like a toddler about to scream bloody murder for not getting their way. He seemed to pause and size me up in a fleeting moment. I'm small and not at all intimidating physically, so I told him that I hope he makes it home safe, quickly unlocked my car, jumped in and locked myself inside. When looking up from locking the car door, I see him speed walking back across the street from the direction that he originally came from. No limp, no awkward walk whatsoever, no distress or pain showing even slightly. Just a normal speed walk of a physically well person, a rageful person. I knew then that I had dodged a bullet, and I felt pretty dumb for hanging around the city after dark alone. At that point, I didn't even care about the traffic anymore. So I turned over my engine and hightailed it home in what ended up being an hour and 45-minute drive. But this time the traffic was 100% worth the inconvenience. PSA if you haven't heard it enough already. Be careful who you give your attention to, especially when you're alone. Stay aware and always be cautious, even when strangers seem harmless at first. Crazy bad acting hitchhiker guy. I really hope that you got the help you needed, rather than the help that you wanted. I'm a 22-year-old female. About a week ago, I had met this guy at some bar in Michigan. My friend and I were playing this game where we made up fake names to give out, so I gave him a fake name. He seemed nice and funny, and we had a good time together. Kissed a couple of times, danced together, etc. At one point in the night, I had posed next to this photo booth and he took a pic of me. But I found out he was way too old for me, and I'm not really looking for anything serious. So at the end of the night when he asked for my number, I told him no, and then I left and got onto the ferry that takes everyone back to the mainland. But then he got on too and sat with me even though his friends were still back at the bar. I asked what he was doing and he then said, "Well, I'm coming back with you." To which I then said, "No, my uncle would kill you." And he then said, "Not if I kill him first." He said it jokingly, but it still freaked me out, and I didn't like that he got on the boat with me. I told him when we got back to the mainland that he had to stay on the ferry and go back. He said fine, and he did. Then a couple of days ago, I got a notification. He found my Instagram and DM'd me that he found me and missed me. I had no idea how he found me, because again, I gave him a fake name and no information whatsoever. The only thing I can think of is that he had reversed image searched the picture that he took of me and found my Instagram there. I told him that was creepy, and I told him he was way too old for me and to not contact me again. Then I blocked him. I feel like it was a huge breach of my privacy. Obviously, if I'm not giving you my information, I'm not interested. I'm just worried now that this is going to go further. I really hate how he found me only using a pic of me. It freaks me out. And I really feel guilty, like this was my own fault for kissing him and dancing with him and letting things get a little heated on the dance floor. But I mean, I had no idea it would turn into this. I live near a small city where we do most of our shopping at. For reference, I'm a female, and I was also engaged by this time, and I'd lost a lot of weight and was pretty fit for our wedding. We also went target shooting together, so I was pretty decent with my firearm, and we both legally conceal carry everywhere we went. We never had to use them because my husband has a rugged, mean look to him that usually deters most people. By this time, the local Walmart became a bad area for suspicious behavior, which never seemed to be resolved by the police during this time. There was often a white commercial van in the parking lot this year, and it was very common to see Facebook posts about Hispanic men following women and children throughout the aisles at night at Walmarts all over the country. Many instances where they would try surrounding these victims. My now husband and I went to Walmart to grab a few snacks and go look around the store. He came in with me but immediately split off from me, saying he would be back at the sportsman section while I go grab chips from the opposite side of the store. We continued on and I headed to the chip aisle, searching for the specific bag my husband wanted. I noticed a man at the end of the chip aisle while I was somewhere searching the center shelves. I didn't think much of it, and I didn't even acknowledge to the man that I had noticed him. I just continued searching for the chips. I had trouble finding the brand I was looking for, so I walked to the next aisle, avoiding passing the man to search there. The man came around to the aisle from the opposite side, acting as if he was also searching. I now noticed this man was dark-complected, maybe of Mexican descent. By this point, my guard was up, because seeing Hispanic people in my city is super rare, and especially at night. And I remembered reading a post about Walmart following just earlier that week. But I tried not to assume and just continued my shopping. Another one of these men ended up joining the first one, and they both seemed to be reading the back of the products together, and continue reading several products in hand. I never found the chips, so I decided to test my judgment of these men, and went back to the aisle that I had originally found them, again avoiding passing them, acting as if I still couldn't find the chips. These men only took 30 seconds to continue back to the aisle with me. Again, the opposite side of the aisle. But now there were 3 of them in the exact area where I saw the first one. I continued acting completely unaware, playing off like I was content. I then texted my now husband that I was being followed. I will say by this point I had all plans to use my firearm if I needed to, and I still think having it on me was the only reason that I wasn't scared. He texted me back that he was still in the sportsman section, but will start walking my way, and he asked me to meet up with him. I agreed. I put my phone away and continued my act, looking at the chips one last time and then shrugged, giving these men the idea that I'd given up my search. I had started walking at a normal pace towards my husband. Only a few seconds after walking, I could see my husband from a distance. He had his thumbs in his front pocket jeans like he was resting his hands, but I knew that he was prepared to use his firearm. I will say that this made me feel so comforted that I literally smiled, knowing I was going to be safe by this point. As I reached halfway, I could hear the footsteps a few feet behind me, but I still acted completely unaware. I noticed my husband staring at them with his protective stance and stone-cold facial features. As I got close enough to touch him, that's exactly what I did. I walked into him gently with a hug while he was still watching them, and I then heard running footsteps scatter behind me. He took a moment to check around, still with his solid, mean face. Then he silently directed me to start walking in front of him. We have a mutual understanding that his silence usually means it's time to go, so I started out of the store with him behind me, neither one of us with any purchases. Sure enough, there was a white van only a few rows from his car. On the way home, I had asked him how many were following me since I couldn't see behind me while walking to him. I should have never asked because it scared me a bit. I expected about 3 or 4, but no, he said there were 7 of them. My name is Vanessa. I'm a 29-year-old female, and this incident happened when I was 19 years old. In 2013, I worked at a Chinese restaurant in a small town in Northern California. I worked part-time, so I would get off work at about 8 p.m. The restaurant usually wasn't busy around 7:30 p.m., so I would start my closing duties around then. I was gathering all the trash bags to take out before I clocked out for the night. The restaurant is directly next door to a gas station, and the whole area isn't well lit, so it was pretty dark outside. The dumpster is gated near the restaurant as well as the gas station. Both places have cameras, but the restaurant cameras were not facing the dumpster. The gas station only had one camera facing the dumpster in the bathroom area. The parking lot for the restaurant was completely empty, and there was one black car and one red truck with white stripes on the side at the gas station. I opened the gate to the dumpster and threw away the bags of trash. When I was done, I had closed the gate. When I turned around to face the gas station, the truck was coming closer to where I was standing. Now, the dumpster is in an open area so that any car or truck can drive up to it. Now, as the truck was pulling up to me, I tried to move out of the way, but the person accelerated a bit, and it then trapped me between the truck as well as the gate surrounding the dumpster. As the person did this, I then asked really loudly, "What do you want?" Now, as I mentioned before, it was dark outside, and there weren't really any streetlights around, so I didn't see the person's face, but I could tell by the big silhouette that it was a man driving. I asked again what he wanted, and all he did was reach out with his hand to grab me. When he started to do this, I then yelled out, "Get away from me!" And I did this about 2 times. Someone from the gas station ran out to see what the commotion was. When the clerk had noticed how close the truck was, he ran up to help me, yelling, "Hey, get away from her!" The truck reversed quickly and then drove off, almost running into another car and running a red light. The gas station clerk asked me if I was okay, and I started to cry as I explained what happened. He walked me back to the restaurant and told the owner and his wife what happened. They had asked the clerk if the camera caught the license plate number, but the clerk said no because the camera was broken and had been for a while. After that happened, the owner of the restaurant took the trash out every night himself, and I believe that the gas station had the camera fixed, with even a few new ones installed as well. I had traveled to Seoul, South Korea for a week by myself back in 2018. Because I was still studying and Seoul is expensive, I decided to book a room in a hostel. It was supposed to be a mixed dorm for 6 people. Upon arrival, I found out that I was actually going to be sharing a room with 5 other men who were already staying at the hostel. At that point, I was still quite naive and didn't think much of it. Besides, the hostel was already fully booked. There was 1 guy from Japan, 1 Korean, 2 Chinese, and a German in my room. The German guy gave me really weird vibes from the beginning, especially by the way he'd just stare at me. But I brushed it off because I'd been out and about all day. Every day he'd asked if I wanted to hang out and go see the sights together, which I really liked to do on my own, so I just always came up with an excuse. One time I accepted his invitation to explore Gangnam, and it was just awkward. We had very little to speak about besides small talk. When I'd get ready in the morning, he'd just stand there and watch, saying nothing. I got annoyed and I asked him if he didn't have to be somewhere else several times. He'd just shrug. Anyway, for the entire week, I was just really weirded out, but did my best to avoid him. One time we ran into each other at the cafe in the city center, which I found strange because what are the odds of that? Now, the other guys in my dorm room were actually really nice. We even all went out to dinner one night. Then on my very last day, I woke up too early and then drifted back to sleep. The next time I woke up, it was to him sitting by my bedside and caressing my arm and shoulder. I immediately sat straight up and asked what he was doing. Even though it was only my arm he was touching, I still felt so disgusted. I always thought of myself as someone who'd scream and curse at someone in a situation like this, but I was just simply dazed and shocked. Well, he then went on to confess his love for me, how he wanted to meet up when we were back home and how I was just so special, which by the way, I'm from Germany too. When I pointed out he couldn't possibly fall in love with me because it had only been a week, he insisted that he just knew and that he wanted to show me his affection. Now, at this point, I was just nauseous. Of course, he was leaving that morning too and had offered to go to the airport together. I then insisted on taking a later bus, and he thankfully left it at that. I couldn't wait for him to just go on and leave me alone. I'm glad I didn't run into him at the airport, but at some point I just burst into tears because it had been so exhausting to ward off his advances all week and then gently tell him that I wasn't interested in him after he'd fucking touched me while I was sleeping. I don't even know how I managed to remain so calm and polite to him, but who knows how he would have acted if I'd been aggressive. With hindsight, I think I could have insisted to switch rooms, but up until that very last morning, nothing had actually happened. And I would just tell myself that maybe the poor guy was just awkward but didn't mean it. After that, I never doubted my own instincts again. For context, this happened when I was 19 in my first year in college, and I'm a female. I never thought a school could become a nightmare until my psych professor, who we'll call Mr. Thornton for the purpose of this story, turned it into one. It started innocently. Odd glances that lingered too long, and a feeling of being watched. But soon it escalated. He started showing up everywhere I went, as if he knew my every move. The park, the grocery store, even my own street. I lived in a rental home off campus with one roommate who I barely spoke to. Every time I turned around, there he was, his eyes locked onto mine. I confided in friends and my roommate, but they just brushed it off as paranoia. One evening as I walked home, I had heard footsteps echoing mine. My pace quickened, but the footsteps matched, growing closer. Panic set in when I then realized it was Mr. Thornton. His twisted smile sent shivers down my spine. Fear consumed me, and I changed my routine. I took different routes, but he always found me. My grades had plummeted as I couldn't focus in class, constantly aware of his gaze. I confided in a trusting teacher hoping for help, but nothing changed. They said he was just friendly, and the reason I must be seeing him so much is because the campus is small and it just must be a coincidence. But that doesn't explain him showing up on my street or the store. One night I woke up to the sound of tapping on my window. Dread filled the room as I saw Mr. Thornton's silhouette, his eyes fixated on me. I slammed the blind shut, trembling in terror. I called the police, but by the time they got there, he was of course gone. All they could do for me was write a report and say with no proof I was unable to file a restraining order. Therefore the stalking continued, his presence an inescapable nightmare. I felt like a prisoner trapped in his twisted game. One day he cornered me in a deserted hallway with a sinister grin etched across his face. My pleas fell on deaf ears, and he whispered, "You're the most beautiful person I've ever seen." I managed to push him away from me and then run down the hall and out to the courtyard. I immediately ran home. I reported him to the authorities, but again, they couldn't do anything, and the nightmare persisted. My sleep was haunted by his face, my days clouded by the constant fear of his presence. The school turned a blind eye, and my pleas for help echoed in empty hallways. In the end, I went back to my home state just hoping for a fresh start. I enrolled in community college there and eventually graduated, but the memory of Mr. Thornton's sinister pursuit has always lingered. A chilling reminder that nightmares aren't always confined to dreams. They can walk among us, disguised as teachers in the halls of the familiar. This happened only a few days ago. A little background information. I decided to visit my Nana for a little while since it's been a few months since I'd seen her. The neighborhood my Nana lives in is not the best. A lot of drug use, bad people, you get it. Anyways, since there was nothing eventful going on, I decided to go outside and walk around the front of the house, messing with things here and there and playing with Groot, a Siberian husky my Nana has. I soon noticed two guys who looked to be in their mid-20s walking up and down the street next to our house. I didn't think anything of it since it's normal to see people walking around in the street even when it's close to dark. Continuing on without giving much acknowledgement to the men, I bent down to pick up a lock I'd found. When I did, I could feel their eyes on me. I turned around only to see them both smiling at me with huge, almost sinister smiles. They then walked to the front of our house and just stayed there watching me while looking over the house. This went on for about 10 minutes before they finally walked away, but it didn't end there. Since I still wanted to be outside, I continued to walk around and mess with things as I did before, and soon enough, they had come back. Now, I'm a shy, antisocial person, so I just ignored them, acting as if I didn't even see them, and continued to pet on Groot. I then felt someone grab my hips, and I shit you not, I jumped forward when I looked up, and one of the men were standing there grinning. He had brown messy hair which really fit his whole dirty attire. It was the same for his friend, only he had blonde hair and a bit ungroomed facial hair. They both smelled horrible. It was a mix of trash and weed. He then reached out to pet our dog, but jerked back when Groot barely missed biting his hand and letting out a deep low growl. The man then mumbled, "Stupid mutt," and then asking me, "So how old are you?" I stopped for a second, still surprised that he had touched me, and a little upset that he had called the dog I've grown up with a stupid mutt. I then quietly said, "I'm 13, to which he then replied with, "Well shit, you look grown to me." He then walked over to his friend and whispered something to him. It must have been funny because they had both started laughing. He then walked over back beside me and just stared me down. To give you a mental image of this, I'm a 5-foot 13-year-old girl standing in the middle of two what looks like grown men. So needless to say, my anxiety was really kicking in. He then reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a little cloth with something inside it. He then grins and then says, "Here, smell this." I just back away and say no thanks. He glances up at his friend and then back down at me before walking a little closer and then saying, "Oh come on, please, it'll make you feel good." His friend then snickers before mumbling something under his breath which I couldn't hear. Groot starts barking at the men and I walk around them and then say, "No, I'm good. I think I should be heading inside now." They both then watch me as I walk inside with Groot without saying a word. Fast forward about an hour later, and my Nana tells me she has to run to the store real quick, and without thinking, I just say okay and lock the door behind her. A little while after she left, I had heard Groot start going crazy, barking and growling at something. Well, I walked out of my room, and I went to go see what or who he was barking at. I crept over the large window that's in my Nana's living room, and I looked outside to see the guys from before slowly backing up from the door, then walking away from the house. When my Nana arrived home, I had told her what happened, and she called the cops. But since the police in my town are pretty shitty, they didn't really do anything but just say, well, they were probably just messing around. I wouldn't worry too much about it. So yeah, that's my story, and I really hope I don't see those guys again. Back around the time when the spooky clowns were popular and sightings were going around in the United States, I had my own encounter with one. One night, just after the sun had barely gone down, back in September of that year, I was still living at home with my parents due to losing my job, and my fiance was a semi-truck driver that went out during the week and was home on the weekends. I was sitting at my parents' computer playing games and listening to music at the time when I got this funny feeling. At first, I put it off as I would normally get these feelings from time to time. About 20 minutes later, I got that feeling again, but this time I also got that feeling like you're being watched. I turn around and look over my shoulder at the computer room door, but I don't see my parents or the house cats. I turned my attention back to what I was doing, and again the feeling went away. Later on, about 30 minutes go by, and I get the watching feeling yet again, and this time it wasn't going away, and it scared me. Now, I forgot to mention, but there are 2 windows that look out of this bedroom window. One on your left while sitting at the desk, and one on your right. The left window has a clear view to the neighbor's house and front yard. Past that, you can see down the street to the end of the block. There's a tree line in between my neighbor's yard and ours, but it's not thick and full of trees, but most of them are dead. Anyway, I looked out the right window and I didn't see anything. I couldn't for some reason look out the left window because I knew that's where I would see something. I slowly turned my head just so I could see just out of the peripherals that there was something standing there. It was wearing all black except the face. The face was kind of white in another color, but at the time I couldn't tell. My heart started racing and my eyes widened. Now I knew for a fact something was there because it wasn't moving. I turned my head a little bit more, and then I saw it. A person with a creepy clown mask on. I froze, and I couldn't move no matter what I tried. The clown lifted a finger up to its mouth, making the shush motion. I felt my breath and heart race even faster, because in the other hand it looked like he had a knife. I just sat there for what felt like forever, until the clown walked to the window and then tapped on it with the knife and then started to cut the screen. I immediately unfroze and ran out into the living room where my dad was at the time, and then told him everything I saw. He got up and then went to the window, and he then saw the screen was ripped open. He then called my mom into the room, and we both pointed at the window screen. She gasps in horror and immediately grabs her cell phone to call the police. I stayed with her while my dad went outside and looked around the house for this clown, but he never did find him. As the police arrived, I had told them the story of what happened the same way I told my parents. After they took my statement, the officer went outside and looked at the window and around it. He saw wood chips in the ground, as well as footprints that led into the woods behind our house. I never found out what happened after that night, if the police caught the clown or not. But all I know is, if that clown got through that window and I was home alone, I really don't think I'd be here today. When I was about 25, I was living with my boyfriend at the time in a 1-bedroom apartment in San Diego. Our apartment building was on a main road next to other apartments and shopping centers, and was pretty busy during the daytime. But at nighttime, it was definitely a quieter road. We had just gotten a puppy together, a little gray-spotted pit bull who was only around 3 months at the time. So he was still really little, and therefore wouldn't be able to protect me in public from any weirdos. Before I dive deep into the story, I think it's important to highlight that at this time in my life, I was really into listening to true crime podcasts, and I had recently purchased the book The Gift of Fear, written by Gavin DeBecker, per recommendation of the Crime Junkies podcast. I was only a few chapters into this book at the time, but basically it highlights the fact that our bodies will send us in a fight or flight response signal way before we're even aware of dangerous or sketchy situations are about to happen. Even if it is just a gut feeling of feeling a little off, A feeling like someone is watching you or getting goosebumps by just looking at a stranger we don't know. Along with my knowledge of true crime, the basic points I learned in this recently purchased book, and my dad's strict nature and repetitive lectures about stranger danger situations, I feel like I have a good sense of identifying sketchy situations and not writing them off in the moment just so I can be polite in public. On the day of this incident, I was just getting home pretty late from my friend's house who lived only about 10 minutes away. I had just brought the puppy over to hers for a little while to play with and to hang out together for the night, and I didn't end up getting back home with the puppy until about 10:30 p.m., so pretty late for a weekday. We only had street parking where we lived, so I parked my car right off the busy road that I mentioned earlier, and then gathered my stuff inside the car before I opened my car door. For the time I lived in this apartment, there would sometimes be random homeless people or people on drugs who would wander down the street during the day. For this reason, I always check outside my car windows and rearview mirrors before I get out of my car, just to be sure that there aren't any weirdos or sketchy people outside waiting for me. The coast was clear when I checked outside my mirrors, so I proceeded to get out of my car, grab my things, and then get my puppy out of the passenger side. Just as I was almost finished gathering my belongings and my pup, a low-rider type of car pulled up just ahead of me. It parked right outside another small apartment complex that I had to walk past to get to my building. This didn't seem odd at first, because my initial thought was they were either dropping someone off or picking someone up from that exact apartment. Still, I was wary of the car because it was so late at night, and I'm usually paranoid for my own safety. It had to have been around 1 minute that the car was just sitting there. To me, it felt like too long of a time, to be honest, and I was really confused why no one was, 1, exiting the vehicle, or 2, coming out of the apartment complex to get into the car. I went ahead and shut my passenger side door, locked the car, and then slowly started to walk back to my apartment building. I had to have only taken about 7 slow steps before I got this weird pit feeling in my stomach, like I should turn back and not pass by the car that was just sitting there. At that moment, I quickly noticed that there were 4 guys all sitting in the car, with one sitting in the passenger seat just staring back at me out the right side view mirror. They had to have been around my age, late 20s or early 30s, but to be honest, they looked a bit sketchy. Not like random guys my age you would see populate San Diego. They didn't look like they were from the area. I don't know how to explain it, but my brain was just taking in as much info as it could because I was a bit sketched out. Immediately, I also felt a bit of guilt for thinking this way. Just profiling strangers as being sketchy when they hadn't exactly done anything yet. After all, I'm probably just being paranoid. Plus, my apartment was so close already. What is the worst that could happen? I could probably try and run if they jumped outside the car. But considering I had a 3-month-old puppy with me and 3 bags that I was carrying inside, I would be slowed down, and I didn't want to risk that chance. I decided to turn around and walk back to my car, acting like I had forgot something else inside that I needed to get. I opened my passenger side door again and just pretended to shuffle around the inside while I kept an eye at the car out of my peripheral. They still were just sitting there with the car in idle, with that man still staring at me out of the rearview mirror. I immediately called my boyfriend as he was just inside the apartment. I figured it would be best if he came outside and at least walked me inside. I called him. No answer. I called again. No answer. And then finally he calls me back. Bless. I answer and I proceed to tell him all about the sketchy car situation quickly, and I ask him to come outside as fast as he can. I was just far away from the men in the car that they couldn't hear my conversation, and I figured it helped to at least be on the phone with someone in case they did try to do anything. It felt like 10 minutes before my boyfriend finally came out, but was probably only about 2 minutes in reality. But when he did, he managed to walk at a normal pace toward me from afar, not quick enough if I might add. The men in the car didn't immediately put 2 and 2 together that I knew this guy until he finally made his way to me and then helped me grab 2 of the bags that were in my hand. The second they realized this guy was my boyfriend, they sped off as fast as they could down the road. But that's not it. Up ahead down the road, they made a quick donut-style U-turn back towards us, and my heart began to race yet again. They drove up really slowly on the other side of the road, just mean-mugging me and my boyfriend, all four of them. Such a really weird-ass stare-down situation. And once again they sped off, making an immediate quick right, just skirting off back to another main crossroad. I immediately called the police to report the vehicle as well as the direction I saw them headed. But being that San Diego is a pretty big city and I didn't get the license plate number, there wasn't much else I could do, and I never found out if they were pursued or not. Needless to say, I've since analyzed the incident, and I kind of believe they were either trying to steal my puppy or steal me. I know a lot of people try to steal pit bull puppies for illegal dog fighting in the area, so that could have been it. Or more sinister, they could have been trying to kidnap me for whatever reason, such as sex trafficking, as it is super common in the Southern California area. There had actually been quite a lot of PSAs about sex trafficking in San Diego becoming more popular around this time. Regardless, I wouldn't have been able to take on 4 grown-sized men alone, even if I did have a can of pepper spray on me. Whatever the reason, I'm happy that I escaped a potentially dangerous situation, and I'm also very thankful that I happened to have just started reading that book telling me to trust my gut. Otherwise, I'm really not sure I would have trusted my gut reaction telling me to turn back to my car. Always trust your gut, people. Don't ever feel bad for being rude to protect your safety, and don't write yourself off as being paranoid. It's better to be safe than sorry. Also, get a dog to protect you if you can. I don't have my dog anymore because I'm no longer with my boyfriend from that time, but when our puppy grew up, I felt way more safe walking around the neighborhood. He was such a love bug whenever he met people, but if I was walking around alone at night, he always had his guard up and would definitely protect me if prompted to. To the 4 men in that car that I came across that day, I don't know what you had planned for me, but I'm so glad that you either changed your mind or that you weren't successful. This probably won't be the scariest story that you'll come across, but it was fairly weird and creepy to me at the time. For a little background, when all this happened, I was about 23 years old. I had graduated from college in the middle of the recession. After job hunting for about 6 months, the best I could do was a part-time morning receptionist position paying $8 an hour with no benefits. My boyfriend at the time ended up getting a pretty good job in Maryland where his dad's side of the family's from, and he had asked me to move with him. I believe that if my employment prospects had been better, I probably would have declined, as we had only been dating for a year. But I looked at moving as a fresh start with the man I loved, and I figured that I had nothing to lose. After a few weeks of packing and saying goodbyes, we moved to Baltimore County. We were able to rent a small townhome, and within a couple of months, I had started a new job with a real estate brokerage as an administrative assistant. It didn't pay very well, but it was full-time, had benefits, and all of my coworkers were very nice. So this is ultimately why I ended up staying in Baltimore when my boyfriend dumped me for another girl 6 months later. He said that I could stay as long as I needed to find a new place, but things got very awkward and there was a lot of drama, so I needed to find a place quickly. I didn't have a lot of money and I couldn't afford my own spot, so I found a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in my budget, but also in a nice area in a suburb of Baltimore. I didn't have a lot of stuff, so I moved in just a few days later. The lady I was renting from was a little older, but she seemed nice. There was another younger woman renting a room as well. At first, things were fine, but I noticed that I started finding notes everywhere. For example, there was a post-it note left on the bathroom faucet saying that I needed to put my toothpaste in the drawer as opposed to leaving it out on the counter. I made toast one morning before work, and I came home to a post-it note saying to clean out the crumbs from the bottom of the toaster after each use. I found various notes telling me to do things like leave my bedroom door open when I was at work, collect my mail from the table downstairs so that it doesn't pile up, turn the volume down on the main TV when I got done using it, leave the thermostat as it is, etc. The landlady was also very adamant that I didn't have any men in the house. Even when my cousin Brian was passing by on his way home to Richmond, I had to stand out in the yard to talk to him. I also kept seeing stink bugs in the house, and I had asked the landlady about pest control, but she said that pest control wouldn't work. We don't have a lot of them where I'm from, so I believed her. One day I went to work, and when I came home, my room had been emptied out. The landlady wasn't home, so I went over to the other girl's room to figure out if she knew what was going on, and my stuff had been set up there instead. The girl wasn't there either. At first, I thought that I must have been losing my mind because I could have sworn that I had not been in this room. Plus, I had no idea that the other girl had been planning to move out. When the landlady came home, I had confronted her, and she said that the other girl had moved out and that her room was bigger, so she assumed that I would prefer it. I was pissed because I didn't give her permission to touch my stuff. She also mentioned that a male friend of hers had helped her. I found this strange because I thought she didn't want men in the house. I gave her the benefit of the doubt and let it go because I figured that she was doing something nice, but I had asked her to let me know before she moved my things. Honestly, I really hated the new room. It was in the back of the house and didn't get as much sun as my old room. It had a weird feeling to it, and I would constantly burn candles in there because it smelled weird. There were many nights that I had heard strange noises coming from the backyard, and I'd look out the window, but nothing was there. There were a couple of times that I would swear I closed the bedroom door before getting into bed, but then whenever I would wake up, the door would be wide open. One night I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw someone walking by the closet, but then by the time I reached over to the lamp and turned the light on, the person was gone. At this point, I was very creeped out, and my parents suggested that I move back home. At first, I had resisted the suggestion. I actually liked my job, I had made a few new friends, and I was dating again. I figured I could just stick it out for a few more months until I could find someplace else to stay. Also, a couple of my friends from college had moved to DC, so I had started hanging out with them on the weekends and staying over at their places. I sometimes would drive down to Richmond on the weekends and stay over at my cousin Brian's house. He kept telling me that I either needed to move back home or I could stay with him and his family for a while and then see about getting a job in Richmond. I was on a month-to-month lease, so when I had paid my rent that month, I had told the landlady that I would be moving out at the end of the month. A couple of weeks later, the landlady said she would have to go out of town for work. She was gone for a few days, and at first I was in my normal work week routine. But on the night before she came back, I decided that I wanted to rebel a little. I did things like turning up the TV at the highest volume. I also turned down the AC a few degrees so that it would kick on as it hardly ever did. I promised myself that I would put everything back before she came home. I went to bed that night, but then I woke up again at around 1 to 2 a.m. It was pitch black in the room and I kept hearing those weird clicking and shuffling noises. I turned on the lamp to see that there were dozens of stink bugs in my room. On the walls, on the floor, on my bed, everywhere. One was even crawling on my pillow. They were coming out of the vents. I then realized that's why she said to never touch the AC. I was absolutely disgusted. I took a shower and started packing my things. When I went downstairs into the kitchen, stink bugs were also coming out of the vents. I know I had some plates and cups and such in the kitchen, but I was so horrified by all the bugs, and I'm pretty sure that I had originally purchased those items at IKEA, so I just said forget it. I got in my car and drove straight to Brian's house. Later on that night, my landlady called me asking what was going on. When I left, I had just pushed the house key through the mail slot. I told her that I went ahead and moved out because I wasn't trying to sleep every night with bugs crawling on me. She then said, "Oh, you're such a princess." And then she advised me she would be keeping my security deposit. I did drive back up and stay at a friend's place so that I could work a few more days and then quit my job in person. To this day, I have no idea what happened to the other girl, and I haven't been back to Baltimore, Maryland since. Back when I was 18 or 19, I was living with a friend of mine and I was really interested in modeling back then as a career. So I looked online at ads posted on Craigslist, and this one advertisement really stood out to me. It said great pay for a couple of hours of work. I had my suspicions, but everything seemed legit to me. The payment was $200 to $500 for a clothing or lingerie company. I spoke with them over the phone and I had heard what sounded like a photo shoot going on in the back. We chatted and everything seemed to be going well at first. They said they needed full body photos and headshot photos of me, and then they could book a photo shoot with me. After that, we had set up a date and time for the photo shoot. Somehow they convinced me to give them my address, and where it gets blurry because the only way I would have given it to them is if they said they were going to make sure they covered the cost for the photo shoot and transportation, which they did. Against my better judgment, I had got ready to meet them and I had waited around to the front of the house. A random grayish van pulls up and all of the windows are rolled up. One window is actually duct taped with gray duct tape. I'm thinking a serial killer is going to come out at any moment. And so I open the door to the car, and there's trash all inside of the car, like the person had been living in there for years. I then see no camera for the photo shoot. Thank God that the landlord was home because I had knocked on her door and she opened it. The man was trying to come up and grab me. As soon as he saw her open the door though, he left. He peeled out of the driveway. This was around 2016. I don't remember what day or month though. My name is Taylor, and this happened to me just recently. Please know the way I acted wasn't appropriate, but I don't regret it. Warning for domestic violence and self-harm. It started with the Facebook Marketplace. I like to fix up old cars and upsell them. I came across a car which I'll not name to not give away anything else, but it was old. It ran fine, it just had cosmetic problems. I knew that I could fix it. I looked at the profile having problems with scammers before. The profile was clearly real. A young girl in her late 20s. She was pretty and her profile picture was what I assumed was her boyfriend. She was smiling at him happily in the picture. I messaged her with the typical, "Hey, is this available?" And she responded back within the hour. She said that yes, it was. But she wanted me to be aware that the side mirrors were broken with duct tape as well as other things in the car. Again, cosmetic. I said it was fine, as again, I knew these were easy fixes. We chatted for a little while longer and she seemed really eager to get rid of the car. She was a little far from me, but I would be in that area visiting family anyway, so I agreed to meet her. Again, I don't want to disclose any city information because they were a good distance apart. You may think I'm stupid for using the time to go see the car. I don't care. I wish the horrible part of the story was that this girl was a catfish or threatened to rob me, but it's not. The day we decided to meet, I took an Uber to their house. I planned to visit my family after and then drive the car home. She was perfectly normal. She had her boyfriend and I assume her dad who came out and met me. We exchanged information and the car was mine. I could tell that she was a little scared of me though. She had sort of like hid behind her boyfriend, which again was the same guy from the pictures. She looked like her photos, but I could see her arms. She had several vertical healing scars. I felt bad for her. I have a history of self-harm too. I got the keys and drove to my parents. Afterwards, I drove the few hours home. Once getting on the highway in a few cities before mine, I couldn't help but notice an old beat-up car following close behind me. Again, it was the highway, so I didn't read too much into it. I noticed that the gas tank was about half empty, so I pulled over into the gas station off the highway. I put my car in the slot and began to pump my gas. The car from behind me also pulled up next to me. A big guy with a sleeve tattoo and dark hair emerged from the car. "Hey!" he yelled out in a southern accent. "What the fuck you think you're doing in my girlfriend's car?" I stared at him confused. The dude looked nothing like the guy from the house or her pictures. What? I said, confused, immediately getting a bad feeling. Yeah, that's my girlfriend's car. Her name's Natalie, which was the girl's name from the Facebook Marketplace. I'd like to state that I had changed her name for privacy. Was Natalie cheating on her boyfriend? I'm sorry, I bought this from an older gentleman. I lied. Bullshit. That's my girlfriend's car. Sorry, the man said that he owned it for a year. I lied. That dumb whore. He then huffed and jumped back into his beat-up car. I pulled out my phone and texted Natalie. It felt wrong, but I had to know. Immediately she responded. Was his name Derek? Fake name again. I didn't find out, I responded. Please don't tell that man any of my information. He's my ex, she told me. I didn't respond and just got back into my car after the gas clicked. I noticed who I assumed was Derek was again tailing close behind me. I had pulled over on a quiet road, hoping he would pass. He didn't. He jumped out of his car again, and I instantly regretted pulling over. Roll down your window now, he demanded, so I obeyed. Are you dating that stupid bitch Natalie? He started to ask me questions while saying a lot of profanities about Natalie, to which I then told him, Dude, I told you I have no idea who this Natalie is. I swear to God, I'll kill her. I'll kill her. For good this time. I'll cut her up again. I then thought of Natalie's scarred arm. Did he do that? He couldn't have. I don't know this girl you're talking about, I remarked, but as I leaned in to grab the keys, I had noticed him pulling something out of his pocket. Not even thinking, I had grabbed a pocket knife from my own pocket and then slashed him across the arm, leaving the same marks he did to that poor girl. I then zoomed off, not before running over his foot, and I haven't heard from either of them since. Was it wrong? Yes, but my mom was a battered woman once, and she didn't have the chance to leave. This happened back in March of this year. It was close to my birthday, and my boyfriend had been talking to someone on the Facebook Marketplace about a listing. It was specifically a nerdy collector that had been selling some signed item that my boyfriend knew I would flip for. He called me after work one day because it was close to time for him to be home normally, and he didn't want me to worry. He told me he was sitting in a gas station parking lot waiting for some dude to show up so my boyfriend could buy the gift from him and then head home. At this time, it generally took my boyfriend about 45 minutes to get home from work, so he had been waiting on this dude that whole time. He tells me that the guy started taking forever to respond to texts, wouldn't answer the phone, and that anytime my boyfriend would ask where they are and tell them that he needed to leave soon, they would tell him something different every time. Sorry, I had to wait for my friend to get here, so I had a ride because my car's in the shop. And then, I'll be there in about 30 minutes. We have to drop off my girlfriend at work. Which continued with, Hey, sorry it's taking so long. I'm on my way. I'll only be about 10 more minutes. My boyfriend also tells me that he had previously settled on a different meeting location, but after he had been there for about 10 to 15 minutes, they had asked if he could meet them at a closed gas station down the road. I told him that he needed to leave right now. I told him that they were likely going to jump and rob him because everything was just so sketchy, and that everything they said and did is textbook jumping and robbing. I hear those exact things in true crime stories all the time. He said that he was about to leave anyway because he felt like something was off too. He told me that he parked right in front of the cameras outside of the gas station so that if something did happen, there was a better chance of catching them. He messaged them to tell them that he was leaving, and the guy replied that they were less than a mile away and they'd be pulling in soon. I begged him to leave right that second and to keep note of any cars that may follow him. As we were talking, he had threw his car in drive and then left the parking lot. Not 30 seconds later, my boyfriend told me he got a message asking where he was, if he still wanted the item, and to just pull over somewhere and they could come to him. He didn't reply, and he just stayed on the phone with me until he was 100% sure that no one was following him and that he was far enough away from where they were. He was already sketched out from the beginning, but decided to give them the benefit of the doubt. I told him to trust his gut from now on. This happened to me about 11 years ago. For reference, I'm a female, and I was 18 at the time. A little bit of background. I grew up in a very small town in Wisconsin where everyone knew you by your first name. Nobody even locked their doors. It was the kind of town that was portrayed in a Norman Rockwell painting. All the neighbors were friendly and always willing to help each other. Some people may think that I'm being just idealistic, but it truly was a perfect place to grow up. It was simple and predictable. However, simple and predictable often walk hand in hand with plain and boring. Growing up, I always dreamed about moving to a big city, where the buildings touched the sky and there were too many people to count. A place full of endless adventure, where people dined in fancy restaurants and went to parties on the rooftops. They would sip champagne out of beautiful glasses while they chatted about their summer homes and their latest vacations. I knew that someday I would do all these things that I had only read about in books. When I was a junior in high school, I had started applying to colleges that were anywhere but here. As my senior year started coming to an end, I had gotten offers from a few places, but there was one in particular that I anxiously waited to hear from the most. And finally, the day came when I received a letter addressed to me from that college. I felt like my heart had skipped a beat as I quickly opened the letter. I had been accepted and offered a full scholarship at the college of my dreams. This was it. This is what I had waited for, and this is why I had studied so hard. I could hardly contain my excitement as I ran to tell my parents the good news. Let's just say they weren't as nearly as happy about this as I was, but none of that mattered. I was going to make my own way instead of letting this small town predict my life. So when August came around, I packed up my bags and said my goodbyes to my mom, dad, sister, and my little brother. As I got in my car, I took one more look around and waved goodbye. Then I drove away, leaving the only life I had ever known for the life that I had always dreamed about. 14 long hours later, and I finally made it. It was late, but the city was still very much awake and almost magically to see. The day had been a long one, and I needed a good night's sleep. I had to stay in a hotel that night, and then in the morning I would go to the college and get all set up in my dorm room. The next few weeks were very busy. After I got all settled in and started my classes, I still needed to find a part-time job for my expenses. My roommate then suggested that I check on Craigslist. Back home, we didn't have Craigslist, so I wasn't really familiar with it, but I got online and checked out the job section. Right away, I found a post about a house cleaning job. Growing up, my mom cleaned houses in a city that was about an hour away from us, and in the summer on the weekends, I would help her. Since I already had experience in this, I figured that would be the perfect job, and it paid $300 each week. So I sent an email inquiring about the job. Right away, I got a response. They gave me some information about what they wanted done, and it was all just pretty basic house cleaning chores. They asked if I could start that Saturday, and I quickly responded with yes. Growing up in a small town has advantages, but it also has some disadvantages too. I was pretty naive about the world outside of that small town that I grew up in. I just automatically thought that people were honest and were not out to hurt me. Boy, was I wrong. When 9 a.m. on Saturday rolled around, I got up and dressed and headed out the door to start my new job. I didn't have to be there until 1 p.m., so I ran a few errands first. My roommate wasn't there when I left, but I decided to leave her a note with the address of where I was going. Looking back now, I'm so glad that I did. It was about a 45-minute drive outside of the city. When I turned onto the road that the house was on, there were very few other houses around. I really didn't think that much about it at the time. I pulled into the long driveway and got out of my car. As I did, I had a strange feeling come over me, but I brushed it off and just walked up to the door and knocked. It was about a minute before someone came to the door. I was a little surprised because I had thought I had been communicating with a woman, but instead it was a man that opened the door. I asked about the ad just to make sure I was at the correct house, and he assured me that I was. He said that his wife had placed the ad, but she had a few errands to run, but she would be back later. He motioned for me to come on in, and he said he would show me around. As he shut and locked the door behind me, I had a bit of an uneasy feeling. He took me into the kitchen first, and he showed me around and what exactly needed to be done. We then went into the living room, 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. After he finished showing me around the house, he told me there was one more area they would like me to clean: the basement. I've never liked basements. I think they just give off an eerie vibe. As he started walking down the steps, he told me to follow him so he could show me what I needed to clean down there. I started slowly walking down there when I then caught a glimpse of what looked like chains laying on an old dirty mattress. He looked at me, and the only way to describe it is that it was pure evil. Just then, there was a loud banging on the front door. I looked towards the top of the stairs and then quickly glanced back at him. As he took a step up towards me, I quickly turned and then sprinted for the door. I unlocked it as quickly as I could, and there stood my roommate with her boyfriend and a couple of his friends. We all then quickly headed back to our cars. One of his friends got in the driver's seat of my car because I was just way too shaken to drive, and we got the hell out of there as fast as we could. Once we got back to campus, I had calmed down a bit. I asked my roommate how she even knew that I needed help. She said that she had found my note and tried texting and calling me, but that I never answered. Once she hadn't heard back from me for hours, she got worried and decided that she needed to find me. Turns out I had my phone on silent, and I never even knew she was trying to contact me. Thank goodness I decided to leave a note and that she found it when she did, or I might have never been heard from again. I reported it to the police, but they said there was nothing they could really do because a crime had not been committed. I also checked back on Craigslist, but the post had already been taken down. You should always trust your instincts. When something just doesn't feel right, don't do it. Even though this was the scariest thing that had ever happened to me, I wasn't going to let the fear it caused me define my future. A few weeks later, I got a job on campus. Some years later, I graduated, and I actually decided to move back to that simple town and open an office there. I enjoyed every moment of my college years, as well as the memories that I made there. But sometimes life calls you back to the very place you couldn't wait to leave. I needed a new roommate quickly, and eventually settled on this chick from Florida who was moving out to San Diego. She initially came off as a little goofy and naive over the phone, but in person she was just strange. She had no sense for personal boundaries, would eat all of my food, use my laptop in my room when I wasn't home to go on plentyoffish.com, and would barge into my room when I had friends over to say the weirdest shit, all within the first week. She did and said a ton of weird things in the month she lived with me. She started hanging out with a coworker from Subway along with her coworker's boyfriend who just got out of jail and 4 of his friends. They really only came around because she would buy stuff, and they laughed at the dumb shit that she would do and say. She would always leave the window cracked because she lost her keys a lot, and would talk about how she did that all the time. Anyway, her friends broke into the house. They stole my TV, my laptop, the smaller TV that I had in my room, this wedding dress that my aunt wanted to sell on eBay for her, a bunch of DVDs, and my prescription glasses too. I called her freaking out about it, and she was just getting home, and she said she had called the cops on me because her broken laptop got stolen, and she suggested that I took all of my stuff out of the apartment to steal her crappy broken laptop. Cops came and they pulled me aside, and they told me that she seemed unstable and suggested that I don't use Craigslist for roommates anymore. I had her backed against the wall and was screaming at her with my finger in her face when the cops walked in. I thought I was screwed when they saw that. But after talking to her for just 5 minutes, they seemed to understand my frustrations with her. The cops just took down what was stolen, and I took her key away, and then put her 1 box of crap outside of the apartment. I eventually got my stuff back on my own because I made up some bullshit about having hidden cameras, and that I wouldn't show them to the cops if I got all my stuff back. And somehow that worked. I was new to a big city and decided I didn't need my car anymore. I listed my car for sale, a 6-year-old Honda Accord. A normal, well-dressed man comes over to see it after a few phone calls about it. He's in his early 40s and his name is James. He's buying it for his daughter in college. I always have my guard up when dealing with strangers, but so far James is personable and he seems legitimate. He test drives it with me in it. He does a thorough inspection. He negotiates the price with me for a while. He asked me to hold the car for 2 days so he can get the money and come pick it up. I agree. A 2-day hold where I won't sell it to someone else. 2 days later, James follows up and we meet again. Midday, normal neighborhood in an urban city. James and I test drive the car one more time. He gave me a Chase Bank cashier's check, which I said was fine. I tell him he needs to come to the bank with me to cash his check and to get the title notarized over to him. This is when he starts acting nervous. We're pulled over on the side of my street discussing this. James in the driver's seat and me as the passenger. I figured if he was going to steal my car, he would have done it 2 days earlier. Now I'm fairly comfortable with him. He asked me to do one more car inspection with him, then we'd go to the bank. I agree, but I'm very set on doing the transaction at a bank. As we both get out to inspect the car again, he jumps back in and floors it as I try to get back in with him. He pulls away quicker than I can react, and the passenger door was wide open. I try to run after him, and then realized I'm not as fast as a car. There are bystanders, and I hysterically ask someone to call 911. One guy does, and I had my phone with me, but my adrenaline was through the roof and didn't even think of it. As I'm on a stranger's phone with dispatch, an undercover cop car with 2 officers pull out of an alley 5 feet from me. I wave them down and hysterically explain my story. They tell me to hop in the back of their car, which I do. I implore them to hurry and we can catch this guy. He just drove off. I explain the car and plate and everything. They assure me that they will not go on a high-speed chase with me in the car, but will radio it in to all the surrounding officers, which they do. The guy gets away and the officers drop me off at the police station to file a report. I filed an insurance claim too, and I was so mad at myself for letting this happen. I suppose it's better than if I was in the car with the guy, but I'm still mad. Of course, James' burner cell phone doesn't work as soon as he had left. I go through insurance and their protocols to ensure that I'm not committing fraud for about 3 months. The week I'm supposed to get paid, I get a call from the police. They found my car 3 states over. James was apparently working with a partner in crime. I don't remember his name, so let's just call him Dickface. James stole the car and gave it to Dickface to sell so it wasn't traceable back to James, and Dickface would have plausible deniability if he was ever questioned. Well, Dickface sold my car to an average Joe who actually did have a daughter in college who needed a car. The daughter tried to register a new car at the DMV, and it came up as stolen. So the cops arranged for me, the average Joe, and Dickface to meet up with them at the station for a little chat. Dickface denies any involvement with James, but he agrees to give us the money back that average Joe paid him if he can just leave without any problems. We all agree to this. Average Joe and I say his daughter can keep the car, and I'll just take the money from Dickface. So eventually I got paid for my car, but this experience really sucked balls and was very stressful. Since then, I've still bought and sold cars on Craigslist, so no lesson was learned, except that now I take a photo of the driver's license of all of the people that I interact with at the very start. I don't take any chances anymore. This was back in my single mom online dating days. Good old 2016. I came across a decent looking man on Plenty of Fish who lived in my hometown. I did all the right things. Googled him, checked his social media, chatted for weeks before meeting, and met in public. The guy who I'll call Mike seemed very nice. Even bought a small toy for my toddler son. There just wasn't a romantic connection. We both agreed being friends was a better idea and carried on chatting through text. I continued my pursuit of a relationship and my friendship with Mike for probably a few weeks when a family friend called my mother frantic about a post that she'd seen on Craigslist about me. What I found seemed innocent enough. A stranger professing their desire to help me. I was a single mom working in a fast food drive-thru. It was no secret that I was struggling financially. I found it more funny than anything, but I was also curious. My Craigslist admirer turned out to be a friend of my mother who had a crush on me for some years. I was only 22 at the time, and yet this isn't the creepy guy of the story. The older man admitted that he had made his post while drunk after seeing a listing by me, offering sexual favors for money. Pictures of my face photoshopped onto nude bodies, my real name, my place of work. The fact I was a single mom living all alone, all listed in an ad offering sexual favors for money. I was mortified. Luckily, the post wasn't up for long after the older man reached out to it and took screenshots. Also, luckily the poster was stupid enough to use their real phone number and a selfie I'd only sent to one person. It was Mike. I chewed him out and cut him off immediately. Looking back now, I wish I had done more, and I thank God that I wasn't targeted or assaulted as a result of this disgusting creep. My roommate V was always at her boyfriend's place, so I was living essentially alone in a 2-bedroom apartment, and my friend Esme was crashing with me while looking for her own place. She had found a place nearby renting a master bedroom with an attached bathroom, female only, for way cheap. We checked out the Google Street View on my laptop, and it looked like a cute little beach house. She rode her bike over there to check it out alone. The house was right by the beach and tons of people were always around, so we thought nothing of it. She said that it was 2 beach-type white guys, a young disheveled stoner guy, and a middle-aged parrot-head guy that would close talk while giving her obvious elevator eyes the whole time. She's a pretty petite Mexican girl and was only 21, but looked younger, and the older guy kept saying that she was just what they were looking for, but he was saying it kinda slowly in what she described as an uber creepy voice. The younger guy just stared and followed them around. She thought it was odd that they each slept in the tiny guest rooms and that they were renting out the master bedroom, but decided to take a look at it anyway. She said it was a really nice room in a big heavy wooden 4-poster bed in the middle of the room that looked like it belonged in a castle, and the bathroom had a huge shower with multiple shower heads on the walls, like it was built for a bunch of people to shower at once. She didn't like it being in the back bedroom with the 2 guys looming over her, so she said it was really stuffy and she wanted to make sure her unlocked bike in the front yard was okay. She all but ran to the front yard, and once she was outside with bystanders, she felt much safer. She's standing in the front yard with the older guy, and he's explaining that she can move in right away, but the bed has to stay exactly where it is. It comes with the room and is bolted to the floor, so it can be moved. They have special sheets for it and everything, so she can bring all of her stuff, but can never move that bed. Also, she can have friends over, but only if they're also young women or girls, no men, and they can sleep over, but they also need to sleep in the bed. The hardwood floor was just too uncomfortable. The couches in the living room are suede, so no one can sleep on them. All of these reasons why a big pile of girls need to sleep on the bed. So she's sufficiently creeped out by this guy, and she texts me to come over. I ride my bike over, and as I'm pulling up, she's leaving. We start to ride a little away, and he yells out after us, "It's mandatory, but we always have a blast." She kinda shudders, and I ask her what's up. She says that she'll tell me over drinks, so we ride to the nearest little beach bar. She explains about the room, the bed, and the guys, and then tells me that part of the deal is a mandatory skiing trip to Lake Tahoe in Northern California each year. She can invite girls on the trip that have been to the house before if the guys think they're cool enough. It's free for her and her girlfriends, but mandatory that she goes with the guys as their official woman. There would be other men there, but they all brought their own women. He said it like the women would be assigned to them or something. So our minds start racing, and we then convince ourselves that the bedroom and trip are some elaborate webcam and BDSM situation or something. Needless to say, she never moved in there or took them up on their free ski weekend offer. V ended up moving in with her boyfriend, and Esme moved in with me for a couple of years. She was an awesome roommate. Maybe 2.5 years back, I met a chick at a bar. She had been stood up and I just knocked off for the day. I didn't go there with any idea to score. I just wanted a couple of pints to help me unwind. I'd been there for around 45 minutes when the bartender slipped me a note. It was from a girl sitting at the end of the bar. She asked me to grab a table with her so we could talk. My curiosity was piqued. So I looked to my right and locked eyes with possibly the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. I thought that maybe I'd been given the note accidentally. No way a girl that hot was interested in me. To make sure, I pointed at the note and then mouthed, "Was this for me?" Then pointed to myself. To my amazement, she nodded yes. That's where our evening began. I grabbed a quiet table in the corner and she joined me. We introduced ourselves before getting to the small talk. Her name was Amber and she was 25. Close up, she was even more beautiful than I thought. I asked her why she'd written the note. I was genuinely curious. While I'm not a walking mess, I was nowhere near her level. The possibility I was being tricked came to mind, so I asked if I was being pranked, but she said no. It wouldn't be the first time. My friends seemed to think it was funny that any girl would like me. They put notes on my windshield at least twice pretending to be from a secret admirer. I never fell for it though. I'm far smarter than they think I am. This, however, looked to be a real encounter. If it was, I was going to play it all the way through. The getting to know each other continued another half hour until she asked if I wanted to take her home. I jumped on it, and we walked a few blocks to my apartment. We had a few more drinks and started messing around. I don't kiss and tell, so I'll just say we enjoyed one another's presence for the rest of the night. When I awakened the next morning, she was already gone. I wrote it off as just an amazing dream and hit the head. When I came out, a pair of beer bottles caught my eye. I walked over to get a closer look. One had lipstick residue on the mouth. I still wasn't positive. I walked over to the bed and sniffed the pillow opposite to mine. The wonderful smell threw me back to the previous evening. There was no doubt. It had really happened. I was over the moon for a long time. I hoped to see her again. I went as far as asking some employees if they knew how to find her, but none did. As time went by, however, I wrote it off as just a one-night stand. I began dating a new girl, a wonderful, fun chick to be around, but Amber stayed in the forefront of my mind. This new relationship never really went anywhere, and we ended things a few months in. Being newly single, I had hoped to track Amber down and maybe pick back up where we left off. I returned to the bar and asked around again. I got the same answer. I didn't have the money to hire a detective. Without a last name, I couldn't even do a search on the internet. Providence would arrive in the form of Craigslist. I was browsing the site and came across the missed connection section. It looked to be just as good as any other avenue. So I made a short description of our night together and how I'd like to meet up again. I posted it and went on with my life. All was quiet until day 8. A message came from someone claiming to be Amber. I asked a few questions. They knew all of the answers and even added things no one else could have known. I was overjoyed to be talking to her again and asked if we could meet for drinks. She agreed and suggested the place where we first met. It sounded perfect, almost romantic. I started to believe this may go somewhere. My months-long search was over. For the rest of the week, my stomach was in knots. I was counting the hours. Saturday eventually arrived and I made my way to meet her. She was visible from outside and more beautiful than I remembered. I joined her at the table, and the night went much as it had on our first meeting, all but one thing. Throughout the evening, she checked her phone many times. I assumed that she was just nervous and tried to ignore it. It was a few hours before she then suggested we go back to her place. I'd been looking forward to this for months. On our way out, I visited the bathroom. As I walked away, I noticed that she was fiddling with her phone again. However, now she was making a call. I didn't care. Besides, maybe she was just calling her roommate. She was basically a stranger to me. For all I knew, she had kids. Once again, I didn't care. I mean, she'd hung up by the time I returned anyway, and we made our way to her car. I stumbled my way down the street until she pointed at this plain four-door sedan, and I then shuffled up to the passenger door. She unlocked it, and I fell into the seat. We closed our doors, but instead of starting the car, she just sat there looking at me and smiled at me. Oh, maybe she wants to make out. The idea perked me up. When I leaned over to kiss her, a strange male voice told me to stop. What? I was so drunk that I had a difficult time assessing the situation. I turned my head to the back seat and saw a large masked man pointing a gun at me. "Don't make me shoot you, cowboy!" Instantly, I sobered up. I could tell that he meant every word. I looked over to Amber. Our eyes met, and I knew I'd been tricked. They were cold, lacking any empathy. I was devastated. I lost my desire to live at that very moment. Moving much faster than I should have, I yanked my wallet from my pocket and threw it into the back seat. I think my nonchalance caught the man off guard. He said nothing, even as I stepped from the car and slammed the door. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood mute, staring at the pavement. It remained quiet for around 30 seconds until I heard the car start and then speed away. It wasn't long before I had a massive adrenaline dump. The seriousness of what had occurred mere minutes prior hit me like a truck. I hunched over and began vomiting. Massive amounts of booze and nachos poured from my guts. I eventually ran dry and returned to my feet. I wiped my mouth and made my way home. I wanted nothing but to sleep, and I didn't even bother to undress before falling into bed. Most of the day was gone when I woke up. I chugged a bottle of Gatorade, which was my hangover cure. The events of the previous night became clearer by the second. I felt so stupid, all the time that I'd wasted looking for her. Then I got angry, and my desire for revenge kicked in. A quick shower and a 2-mile walk later, I found myself filing a report. In Chicago, stick-ups generally don't get much attention. When the detective handed me some mugshots, I got the idea that I'd stumbled onto something a tad more serious. I was shocked to see the faces of Amber and her accomplice staring back at me. I pointed them out, and the detective gave me the lowdown. Only at that moment did I realize just how lucky I'd been. According to him, I had fallen prey to a scam. Amber's real name was Shannon, and she'd been a career con artist. The pair had been targeting single men for the last 6 months or more. I was thought to be their 5th victim, and the previous 3 had been killed. I felt a shudder through my body. The detective was unsure why I'd been allowed to live. That made 2 of us. Perhaps our history made me too much of a risk. Maybe she'd been pressured into doing it by her partner. I'll probably never know. It was hoped that I had some new information to give him, but I ended up being no help. We spoke a little longer before he sent me home. Now I was even more confused. I was happy to be alive, but on the other hand, however, I wonder why I'd been spared. I have one particularly funny theory, that they didn't consider $23 on a maxed out card worth killing over. But the truth is, it's not really a joking matter. Things wouldn't get any clearer when Amber's accomplice was arrested. He'd been brought in on unrelated charges, only to lawyer up the second he was asked any questions. He'll stay mum more than likely, even when presented with the possibility of execution. The detective on my case thinks Amber probably won't be caught for a long time, and even if she is, she'll go the way of silence too. If and when she's caught, I hope I can get a few minutes alone with her. Not because I wish her any harm. I've come to terms with her role in the crime. Instead, I'd like to ask why I was spared when others weren't. I'd like to think it's because we made some type of connection on an emotional level. Then again, that's probably just my romantic side thinking out loud. In truth, it probably just wasn't my time. I don't know where to begin this story. It's rather strange and probably not even scary to most of you. But it still bothers me to this day, and I always have anxiety about joining games now. This happened a year ago around the beginning of October. I was really into the game Roblox. I play it every day for hours. I didn't have such a good family situation, so playing it was the only thing I could really do to distract myself. One day, the situation was getting worse, and I felt myself begin to panic. So I decided to join one of the games that were on the main menu. It was a speedrunning game, I think, with all different types of levels to beat. I was just getting done with the first couple of levels when I saw two other people typing in the chat. They knew each other and were cheering each other on in the game. I always found people who did this, and they were always the nicest people to play the game with. So I asked to join them, and they let me, and we just continued to play the game together. I don't want to say their full account names, of course, so I'll just call them by different nicknames. There was a girl who was a year older than me who I'll call Stacy, and the other was a male who I'll call Max. Stacy, Max, and I were passing through levels together until Max eventually had to leave. We were upset but said bye to him and just continued the game together. We were getting to some of the hardest levels when another person came on. We were typing in chat when someone said my account nickname Bab. I didn't know them, but me being nice, I responded. They then told me to shut the hell up. Stacy, who was with me as he said this, told him to back off and asked what his problem was. He ignored her though and just went right back to me. This time he said that if I wouldn't shut up, he'd force his you-know-what into my mouth to keep me quiet. At this point, I was frozen in shock. It went from a normal game to a man now threatening me out of nowhere. And I forgot to mention, but I'm a female. I'm also a minor, by the way. Now and then I would have men hit on me because I hit puberty very young, but not as much as this. I honestly don't remember all that he said to me, as now he began to fight with my friend. He kept asking why she was upset and how much pleasure he could give me. The first time I talked was telling him how old I was, and even then he said that he didn't care. I won't say what he said next, but it was very graphic and disturbing, saying things that he would do to me. My friend at that point asked me if I wanted to leave, but I said no. You might call me stupid for that, but we had gotten so far in the game and it had taken us hours just to reach our spot. I told her to block him and report him, and then just ignore him if he typed in the chat. This seemed to work for a good while, as eventually he left the game. Finally, I thought I was rid of that weirdo, but it was far from over. Another person had joined the game, a different one this time. Stacy and I were still talking to each other as he said hi. We said hi back as we both thought nothing of it. He then asked to join our group, but we were already so ahead of him, and after what happened with the other guy, we told him sorry and declined. Well, that made him mad. He began to curse at us, calling us spoiled and rude. And maybe this was wrong on my part, but I was just done with people today, and I completely went off on him. I told him to leave us the hell alone and that we'd report him if he continued to mess with us. A weak threat, but that's all I could do. He then began to talk to us about himself. He told us that he was a 50-year-old man with a wife and kids and how much he believed in the Word of God. He told us that we were sinners and that we couldn't go to heaven for our crimes. I knew quickly that this was just some sort of sick joke, so I ignored it. But my friend continued to curse at him and tell him to shut up, along with 1 or 2 other people in the game with us. He started to talk to me, just saying that God was speaking to him and then he wanted to speak to me. At this point, I found it funny that he was taking it this far, and I asked what God wanted to tell me. He said that God thought I was hot, and he wanted my number immediately. This part was not even funny to me anymore. I then responded telling him to screw off and ask someone else. This didn't stop though, as he just continued to say really nasty things to me. It was very far from funny now, and I just told him to screw off and leave me alone. This part is what scared me. He simply said, "What a fiery attitude. Let me guess, you're from here." He guessed the exact state I was in. I thought for a moment maybe it was just a random guess and told him that I didn't. He then went on and said, "I know you do. You also live in this suburb." And once again, I did. I told him to stop joking with me, and I asked who he was, but he ignored it and just continued. "Your apartment has a nice view, right?" I then paused. I didn't live in an apartment, and I was on the top floor. I felt myself start to freak out. My friend just told him that neither of us lived there and to go away. I began telling her, "No dude, screw our progress. Let's just leave." As we started to get off the game and friend each other so that we could stay in touch, he then said more messed up things to me. "Wait, you can't go. I know your futures and you're both in danger. You'll meet a man that will change your life." When we ignored this, he then said, "Listen to me." So we just kept ignoring it until our friend request to each other worked, then left just as he said, "I will find you if you leave this game." Then the game closed. I sighed in relief as I thought it was over. I talked to my friend and I told her to just report the account as I'm doing the same. We also told Max, who found it creepy and was sorry that he left. Then we just kind of went on with our day. It wasn't until I was talking to my boyfriend about the whole situation did he look up the guy himself, and he then asked me, "Why are you and Stacy in his bio?" That again made me freeze. I didn't tell him my friend's name, and all I could think was that he was joking with me until I did look up the guy. In his bio it said, "Bab and Stacy, you need to listen to me. At least accept my friend request and hear what I have to say. This is important stuff, and your future is in immediate danger. Risk-free, please, for your own good." That was it. I don't talk to neither Stacy or Max anymore, and my boyfriend still laughs about it today as I have the man blocked. This is still his bio when I check now. Believe me or not, this could have been the biggest troll ever, but it still gives me fear of how he knew where I lived, and I wish no child would hear the things that I'd been threatened with. I just really wonder now, did the two men know each other? Millions of children play Roblox, and someone needs to tell them about the dangers of it. The story happened when I was 16. I'm now 19. Back then, I was an avid gamer, and I was really obsessed with Roblox. Embarrassing, I know, but I was really addicted to those weird horror games, specifically Mimic, which recently came out. One night my parents left me alone, and I'm an only child, so I was the only one home. Although most 16-year-olds would have been hyped to throw a party or have friends over, I was really excited to play Mimic on full volume when no one could hear. Usually I would wear headphones, but since I was alone, I thought it was fun to connect my PC to the speakers and then blast the Mimic on full volume. I was about halfway through my game when someone started going off in the chat. I opened it, and all I saw was some weird user with a strange name. They were spamming random words and numbers in the chat. I didn't think much of it, just that it was another bot saying weird crap in the chat. That was until I saw something familiar in the chat. It was my street name and house number. This made me sick to my stomach. until I realized that this person was probably very far away from me, so they probably had no way of finding me. So I just closed the chat and continued on with my game. A few days passed and I all but forgot about the incident. For the second time that week, my parents left the house. I was really thrilled to play Mimic again with the speakers. 20 minutes into my game, I heard a very faint creaking coming from downstairs. It was like someone was opening and closing a door as quietly as possible, and it was enough to freak out a nerdy 16-year-old guy playing Roblox at 11 p.m. I muted the game and made my way downstairs, but I only got about 3 steps down before I saw a dark, slender figure walk right across my living room. I could feel my heart drop, and it didn't even register in my mind to call the police at that moment. All I could do was watch the figure as it slowly walked into each room, before I then saw it coming to the stairs. Finally, my adrenaline kicked into gear. I then bolted into my room and locked the door, then placed a chair under the door handle. I grabbed my phone and jumped under my bed, finally dialing 911 on my phone. Practically breathing my words, I told the operator what was going on, and she told me to stay on the line. That was when I heard rattling at the doorknob, and I knew that the man was there. I held my breath, and the man started yelling something incomprehensible through the door. The operator was talking to me, but I basically had zoned out at this point. I stayed there for what felt like forever, until a sweet sound hit my ears. The police sirens. I heard them bust down the door and then scream at the man to get on the ground. I just stayed under my bed until the officer yelled at the door that I was okay to come out. After this, it was all just a blur. I called my parents, and it's safe to say that I wasn't left home alone for a while after that. I'm an audiophile. Always have been, always will be. I also play a fair amount of online video games too. Ones where it's pretty crucial to have clean, crisp audio. And games where you're reliant on hearing other players' footsteps. Having that kind of audio quality gives you a real edge over other players. That's why I had my heart set on a Bose A20 Aviation headset. They were without a doubt the best gaming headphones in the market, and at $999.99, just shy of $1,000, they took a lot of hard work to afford. I had to work 10 months at a local gas station, including weekends, just saving a few bucks each time until I could finally afford them. But when the delivery guy finally dropped them off, and I carefully unboxed them and plugged them into my iPhone for a music test, I discovered they were well worth the wait. The depth and range they produced were absolutely phenomenal. I heard songs in ways I'd never even heard them before. But most importantly, I couldn't wait to see how they improved my gaming performance. A few hours later, a buddy of mine and I were playing a game called Hunt Showdown. Apologies for the tangent, but it's an absolutely terrifying experience. Set in the swamps of post-Civil War Louisiana, the game has all kinds of monsters to hunt and take bounties from, but not without a little competition from other players. There's heavy emphasis on stealth, sneaking up on other monster hunters before mercilessly dispatching them and then robbing them of their prize. Hence why I was so excited to using such high-quality audio gear. I was certain it'd give me and my buddy a crucial edge, and I was partially right. The quality of the headphones just made the game all the more terrifying. I could hear every little footstep, every creak of a door opening or a rifle reloading. At one point, I was about to ask my buddy if he'd opened a door in the place we were hiding out at. I turned in time to see a figure in black holding a fire axe above his head. "Rory!" I screamed down the mic as the sickening crunch of the axe impacting with his skull echoed around my ears. It was intense, seriously damn intense, and it was every bit as amazing as I had imagined it would be. So obviously we spent hours hammering out round after round, and not once did I take the things off. Usually after a few hours, wearing a pair of headphones can get kind of uncomfortable, but these things had foam padding in all kinds of places, ergonomically designed not to cause any kind of discomfort. I swear I could wear those things all night, just plugging the wireless connector into my phone, TV, laptop, anything and everything. I was actually kinda disappointed when it came to the end of the night and my buddy logged off to sleep. I stayed up for a few hours testing out each game I had and seeing how the new headset enhanced the audio, and not once was I disappointed. I remember finally logging out and taking the headset off before checking my phone. I had like 4 or 5 missed calls from an unknown number, and my phone wasn't even on silent. It had been ringing and vibrating over my coffee table at multiple times throughout the evening, and not once had I heard so much as a peep from it. That was seriously impressive, and I knew that every penny spent on that headset would be worth it. Only that's about the time my phone buzzed again, the same unknown number text popping up on the screen. It was the local sheriff's department, and on the other end of the line, a lady deputy was asking me if I'd been home that night. My first thought was to wonder just how the hell they'd gotten my number, but I guess the cops just have access to that kind of info. But I answered the lady's question and told her, yeah, I've been home all night. The answer seemed to confuse her quite a bit. She asked me again, and again, I reiterate that yes, I'd been home all night. When I ask her why she was calling, she just answers a question with another question.
We've had deputies hammering on your apartment door for the last 4 hours, and you didn't hear us? Not even once?
Then it hit me. I had my new headset on. Not only that, but the volume was all the way up on them. Not a usual thing I do, but like I said, I was testing them out. I sighed before I started on my long-winded explanation as to why I hadn't heard them calling. I felt kinda dumb not having heard them, and I actually wondered if I'd been in any danger at that point. Totally oblivious to the home invader attempting to break in, all while I'm just sitting there gaming in total ignorance. Only when I asked them what had happened, it was way worse than I ever could have imagined. There had indeed been a break-in, only it obviously wasn't my apartment, it was the one above. A guy had busted into the apartment of the girl that lived there with the intention of robbing her. According to the cops, she'd resisted, tried to fight the guy off, but it hadn't gone well for her, not in the least bit. The home invader had tortured her at first, trying to get her to confess where she had money or jewelry hidden. When it turned out she didn't have any, he beat her to death in frustration. This whole thing happened without me hearing so much as an iota of noise from above. I'd been sitting there happily playing PC games, and someone had been getting murdered right above me. If only I'd taken them off for 5 damn minutes. If only I'd stopped fawning over them just for a little while, that girl might still be alive. It took me a while to get over it. I moved out of that apartment and back to my parents' house, at least until I could find a new place to live. I also sold the headset too, not losing too much money in the process. But sometimes I feel like I'd have happily thrown those things in a lake, even if I did work the better part of a year to be able to afford them. What makes it all worse is that it wasn't some random accident. My greed, my own selfishness, that's what killed that girl. Yeah, that damn scumbag psychopath might have been the one that murdered her, but I was the one that nailed her coffin shut. I like playing CSGO. Usually my profile picture is a character from a movie or TV show, and my name is very generic. You would never think I was a girl based on my picture or name because I don't ask for that attention. I was playing deathmatch with my internet best friend Derek at an ungodly time of the night, just talking about our thoughts and morals over voice chat in the lobby. The server had about 7 people in it, and everyone would throw their 2 cents in with our conversation. It was pleasant and much needed. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Everyone was kind and respectful, something that you hardly see in this game. One person had no microphone and had only talked to us via chat. He told Derek and I've never wanted to be friends with someone over this game before so badly. Will you guys add me? I promise I'll have a mic tomorrow. I was a lonely person back then, so I accepted his friend request. His name was Corey. Derek and I played CSGO deathmatch nightly, just talking about all sorts of things. For 4 days straight, Corey would join us without invitation. We found it odd he would join us because he mentioned how strict he is with himself about being on a tight schedule and how dedicated he is for school. Because of this, we never invited him to our games. Funnily enough, Corey got upset that we didn't invite him to death matches, even though he told us he was focused on school and we only played late at night. One way or another, Corey got the impression that Derek and I were dating, despite Derek talking about his girlfriend at least once a day. I told Corey, yes, we're obviously dating because a male and a female can never just be friends. My voice was as flat as I can make it sound, and as bland as I could try. Corey did not understand my sarcasm, and he actually ran with the thought of Derek and I dating. Immediately, Corey tried his best to win over Derek by buying him in-game valuables. Case keys, a few skins worth real money, etc. Every time Corey would give Derek these things though, Corey would tell him, "You better be treating her right, otherwise you'll pay for it." Now, Derek is a nice guy, and he has a hard time with confrontation, so he never replied to those messages. He would only relay them back to me. After 2 days of getting these gifts, I told Corey while in deathmatch, "You do realize I was sarcastic with you when you asked if Derek and I are dating, right? Derek has a girlfriend and she doesn't play video games." Corey's voice immediately goes into a much calmer voice during this game, and he doesn't stop saying, "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Lord Almighty. You have a blessed life. Thank you." Random people would tell him to stop talking and that he's being creepy. I didn't say anything to Corey for a while after that because despite being over the internet, I felt an awkward connection with him. The following day, day 7 of knowing Corey, he had asked me to join him in a private game. I have immense anxiety about being alone with someone, no matter the circumstances. I simply tell Corey, "No thank you, but thanks for the offer, man." Corey tries to call me over voice and I get a weird nervous feeling. I knew that something was odd about his random voice call request. I checked his profile and he edited his entire profile to fit a 2008 emo MySpace account. He changed his picture from Harambe to rain on a window, and his bio went from "I inject memes for Harambe" to "My life is meaningless without her." That was one of the most bizarre things I saw unfold in front of me over a video game. He explained to me that he wanted to play a private game with just me so he could plan a meetup with me and go get some coffee. He could tell where I lived because I told Derek and Corey about the Seattle superhero that I ran into a while back. But that was only the beginning of all the creepy things he would say to me. At one point he said, "Your voice makes me trust you." That made my skin crawl. Another time in the middle of a match, he said in front of everyone, "Is your body as smooth as your voice? You sound like a goddess on cake." That made me almost vomit. A few more examples include, "You make me want to just snuggle up on my bed and go to sleep," in a cutesy tone. But whenever he said something creepy, I would just ignore it or just awkwardly say, "Thanks, my dude." It felt as if he practiced for hours just to say these lines to me, and it was just unnatural. I knew this guy did not talk to any other females because he told me so. "Girls in real life just find me creepy, and whenever I approach them, they ignore me," is what he said. Something I should have spotted as a red flag. One day he tried to send out a call request that I ended up hitting ignore on. I message him and just say, "What's up? Everything okay?" He only replies with, "Not even close." I had no clue what to respond with, so I just waited for a follow-up message. 10 minutes pass by and he spams me with personal questions. What kind of males are you into? Do you only date tall, skinny men? Do you care what other people think? I oddly feel guilty and feel obligated to reply with honest answers. I tell him, well, I care to an extent of what people look like. As long as they take care of themselves, I couldn't care less what my friends look like. I don't really have a unique type. I just want a healthy-looking guy, regardless of height. Why do you ask? He describes to me what he looks like, followed by a total of 10 photos. I never asked for a picture of him. It never crossed my mind to ask him what he looks like. He asked me all sorts of questions related to, am I attractive enough? Am I too skinny? Too short? Do I have good hair? I tell him, you look nice. He was very skinny, average height, and he looked like he took care of himself. A very normal looking human being. He replies with, thanks, you're so sweet. You're such a lovely girl. I don't message him back and I just launched CSGO because Derek was playing. We play our game of deathmatch and talk about the normal stuff. We make friendly talk with a complete stranger, and at the peak of it, Corey joins. Corey says nothing while we're all playing. I don't have notifications on when I play, so I have to manually check my messages while I'm in the game. During map change, I realized I got flooded by Corey asking, do you find this guy attractive? Does he sound hot to you? Is he funnier than me? I ignore his messages and just keep playing. I did not want to deal with that from him. I only knew him for 2 weeks at this point. Corey notices that I'm ignoring his messages, and he then confronts me in front of this server of 20 people. Why aren't you replying back to me in Steam? I tell him that I don't have notifications on. I'm too busy playing a game to want to hold a conversation while playing a game. Corey goes on about this rant about, I thought we were friends. Why would you ignore me like that? Friends don't ignore each other. And I don't respond to him. This is all over voice, so literally everyone can hear him. I'm clearly uncomfortable, and a random player tells Corey, you're being kinda creepy, dude. She clearly doesn't want to respond to your weird messages. Well, Corey then screams at the top of his lungs at this guy. Go kill yourself! You don't know her like I do! And then he promptly leaves. Derek and I just keep playing our game, ignoring our messages. After an hour, we get off the game and I open my messages. From Corey, I get a roller coaster of messages and feelings ranging from, I'm so sorry I screamed, you didn't need to hear that side of me, to, how dare you freaking ignore me like that? I then reply with, you're taking this friendship pretty fast. I think you should just calm down and take a break. The deepest thing I know about you is your name and your favorite meme. He replies back with, you're right, good night. I was hoping that maybe for once that would be the end of it and he would actually listen. I couldn't be more wrong. The following day, I woke up to my Steam app being spammed from Corey. I need you. I'm at the hospital. A few things I noticed was that he was on Steam via web browser. Your name will have a web browser icon if you're logged in through your web browser and not on Steam or your phone. Another thing I noticed is that he said he was on his phone. If this was actually true, it would have had a mobile icon next to his name. I knew that he didn't have a phone because he told me. I broke mine last month when I threw it against the wall. I remembered that because I think it's odd when people destroy things in moments of anger. I don't mention either of these things to Corey. I figured he was lying because he was in the heat of a moment and was just too scared to tell me the truth. I asked him why he was there, and his response was, I don't know. I was puking blood all of last night for 8 hours, and my mom and dad brought me here. I'm so scared. Again, I was naive and let that slip. I found it odd that his parents would wait so many hours to take him to the hospital while he's puking blood. I didn't tell Corey of my suspicions though. I wanted to see where this was going. I assure him, you'll be fine, I'm sure of it. He then said without a minute passing, my parents are talking with the doctor right now and they're crying. I don't know what's going on. I asked, why aren't you in there with them? He tells me that he's going into the room, but that he was stopped by a security officer who told him, I'm sorry, we don't think you're ready for the news just yet. Have a seat. I play dumb and I don't question his bullcrap story. I reply, it won't do you good to get worried about something you can't control. He then spams me with broken sentences, but I make it out as, I'm so scared right now. Please help me. I can understand when people are crying. It can be hard to see what you're typing, but he told me many times before, I've been hurt so bad before that I can't even cry. I didn't even cry when my brother died. Also, he was typing perfectly clear and readable before and after this message. Again though, I didn't question his story. He quickly tells me, "Oh my God, they just told me I have cancer." I then responded with, "Didn't you just get to the hospital a few hours ago?" To which he replies with, "Yeah, it's stage 4 skin cancer." I didn't let him know that I thought he was lying and that I was currently laughing about it. I messaged Derek about the situation, and I don't reply to Corey for roughly 10 minutes. I opened Corey's messages back up to find him explaining to me how he got skin cancer. He apparently got it from a mole on his chest that he cut off because it was in the way and that it got infected with cancer. I didn't think this lie could get any worse, so I confessed to him that I know he's lying. I express how disgusting it is to lie about having cancer and that my adopted mother died of cancer herself. He rushes his response to, "Oh my God, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. The reason I lied to you was because I'm actually sick, but with something else. I actually have type 1 diabetes. I lied because I didn't want you to think I was fat." I asked him if he remembers sending me pictures of himself, and he said he remembers, but that he was worried that I still thought he was fat. He probably weighs at most 120. I cut off contact with this guy on everything the same day. Roughly 6 months after deleting Corey, I actually ran into him in real life. I knew it was him because his voice was unique and distinct. Corey never saw what I looked like. I never sent him pictures or posted on my Instagram a selfie. I knew it was Corey, and he looked the same as he did in those photos. This was during Seattle Street Fair, but I never thought that I would run into this guy in real life. I'm really glad that he didn't recognize me, and I have no idea what I would have done if he did. When I was 13, I played a lot of World of Warcraft. If you know anything about World of Warcraft, you know that when you're at a lower level, you'll sometimes have higher level friends help you out. This guy was an online friend of my IRL friend and asked if I needed any help in the game, and I just said sure. We got to talking and he told me that he was 13 as well. So we chatted a lot and we became good friends. He lived in Texas and I lived in Canada, so it was just an online friendship. He eventually started to seem interested in me, and he began sending me poems and things. Eventually, he told me that he wasn't actually 13, he was college age. Me being only 13, I just thought, oh, that's okay. We've already talked for months, so I thought nothing of it, which was very naive of me. But being so young, it is understandable. He started getting really flirty, and I was flattered being a 13-year-old girl having a college-aged man interested in me, so I thought it was cool. So wrong, I know. He asked for my phone number, and being young and stupid, I actually gave it to him. I also gave him my real address so he could send me things in the mail. Then he said that he wasn't actually college-aged. He was 40, and he had 3 kids and a wife. One is very close in age to my age at the time. I stopped talking to him and I told him to leave me alone. He starts calling my phone number and leaving drunk voicemails saying he was going to come to see me. I didn't know what to do and I didn't want to get in trouble, so I didn't say anything. He didn't leave me alone though, so I had to tell my parents. They told him to leave me alone, and he actually did for a short time. Recently, he found me by my name, and he keeps contacting me on all of my social media, and also the email account that I've had since I was like 13. He's still married, by the way. He won't leave me alone. Not super creepy, but kind of creepy as he knows my parents' address, and it's still the same as when I told him. We haven't moved. He's actually messaged me saying he's going to be in my area soon via LinkedIn. I didn't respond, and I just pretend that I don't use my social media accounts anymore. I'm really hoping that he'll stop messaging me and will stay away from me. If anything else happens, I'll be sure to send in an update. Hi everyone, my name is McKenna and I'm a 21-year-old female. Like many people these days, I really love online gaming, my favorite being Valorant. If for some reason you don't know what it is, it's kinda like CSGO but with abilities, and just a lot more fun, to me anyways. And if you don't know what CSGO is, I don't know what to tell you. If fun was my only takeaway from the game though, I wouldn't be sitting here writing this story. Well, I ended up making a great friend on the game. At this time, I didn't have a ton of online friends within the game, and I was just generally friendly with everyone. Then I met him. We'll just go by his gamer tag, although at this point his account has been deleted, but his name in the game was Dark Echo. The first time I met Dark Echo in Valorant, I thought it was just another player looking for an easy win. It was late and quiet in my small apartment I'd rented out for college. I'd always found solace in the game's chaotic energy, where the only thing that mattered was the next round, getting some kills, and hopefully winning. I remember vividly how it all started. We were in the middle of a match, and my team was struggling, and every round seemed to end in defeat. That's when we started up a new game, and then someone named Dark Echo joined the game. He immediately said hello on mic while we all waited to queue into the game. His voice was deep and smooth. He seemed friendly, but also mysterious, if you can assume that on someone from just 30 seconds of talking before starting the game. Well anyways, we loaded into the game, and pretty much immediately upon starting our round, this dude was killing it. He was getting kills left and right and was getting aces multiple rounds in a row. Which, for those that don't understand the gamer lingo, an ace is when you single-handedly kill the entire opposing team. It basically means you're a badass, and just about every time someone aces, you can expect major praise from your team, and hate from the other if they're poor sports. But anyways, yeah, this guy was good and kind. He was absolutely unloading on the other team, but also still so kind to the rest of us who weren't on his level, which really isn't very common. People are dicks on this game, and usually the top frag is an absolute jackass to the players below them. But this guy? No rudeness or toxic behavior at all. Anyways, long story short, we won that game and we decided to keep the same party. Then we played another, and another, and another, and you guessed it, we won all of them. By the time the night was over, he'd led us through a string of victories that really lifted our spirits and our ranks, and honestly, I would have kept playing if it was up to me. All in all, it just felt like a lucky night, a good team up, but nothing more. Then came the friend request. It was late and I was half asleep when the notification popped up on my screen. Dark Echo wants to be your friend. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I accepted. I mean, why not? This dude was awesome and nice too, and he had a sexy voice, which as a young woman myself, I did like it. So yeah, I got curious about this guy. The first few days went fine. We played together regularly and he was always polite, sometimes even charming. He shared a lot of tips about the game, telling me how to improve on my aim and game sense, and we had long conversations about strategies, games, and life in general. He was really good at making me feel special. And yeah, I won't lie, I did start developing a little crush on him. One thing led to another, and before you know it, we're now adding one another on Discord. If you don't know what that is, it's basically like Skype, but so much better, and a lot more options. Anyways, we had started chatting and doing voice calls, and little by little, things started to change. He began messaging me and calling me a lot more frequently. It all started innocently enough. He would wish congratulations on a good game, but here's where it gets a bit weird. The games he was congratulating me on were my solo games, as in the ones that he wasn't a part of. But on Val, you can see your friends' games and their progress. So yeah, I guess he was watching? Weird, but whatever. But then the messages became more personal. He knew about the sleepless nights I'd been having, the stress of balancing college and a part-time job, which I hated. At first though, I just thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe he just had a knack for reading people. But then he mentioned details about me and my life that no one should have known. The layout of my apartment, the cat that I lost when I was younger, mentioning the name of my actual workplace when I never shared such details. I tried to brush it off as just a fluke, but the sense of unease gnawed at me. I started noticing that he was always online at the same times I was, even when I wasn't actively playing Valorant. When I wasn't logged in, he would send me messages that felt increasingly invasive. Questions about my daily routine, my plans for the weekend, just constantly prying into my real life outside of the internet. With how nosy he was becoming, let's just say it didn't take long for my crush to fade away. I was beginning to see him differently and just started getting really creeped out by him.
I can't wait to see you this Friday.
He typed to me as if he knew something I didn't. I never gave him my real address, so I thought I was safe. But then one evening, I received a package at my door. Yeah, I know, this is so damn cliche, but it really happened. There was a small box with no return address. Inside was a black hoodie with the Valorant character on it that I always mained, Killjoy. Along with it, a simple card that said, "I hope you like it as much as I like you, cutie." Signed, Dark Echo. I was stunned. My heart was pounding. I threw the hoodie away, but the discomfort remained. I tried to block him on everything to sever all ties, but he found other ways to reach me, through new accounts and new aliases. The messages grew darker, threats veiled in the guise of concern. He claimed to be watching over me, ensuring my safety, though it felt like a twisted form of control. One night as I sat at my computer, the lights flickered. I brushed it off as just a power issue, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A message popped in from Discord from a random account.
I'm still here, and I still want to play Valorant with you. Come on, it'll be great.
He sent this along with a weird-ass selfie of himself sitting at his desk waiting for me to join the game. No joke. I began to panic, but not before blocking his new account and then unplugging everything. I then locked my door, my heart racing. The paranoia settled in, making every shadow in my apartment feel like a looming threat. I moved my gaming setup to a completely different location, changed all of my passwords, and cut off every possible connection to him. I unfortunately even cut out other online friends associated with him because I just felt like I had to. That I had to cut out literally every connection to him for my own safety and sanity. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, lurking somewhere in the corners of the digital world. Before I end this, I do want to mention that I do know his real name, or at least the one he told me. But for my own safety and his, even though he does not deserve it, I don't want to dox him in case he somehow hears this. The fear that he's caused me is something that I don't wish on anyone. I barely even play Valorant anymore because I'm terrified of meeting other creeps in the game just like him. I mean, the dude was so nice at first, and he was good at the game, like really good. But he turned out to be just another online creep, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Maybe one day I'll play again, but for now, I'm taking a very long break from that game. I'm also moving out very soon since this freak has my address, and I don't want any more creepy packages showing up on my doorstep. Be safe out there, everyone, even online in a video game. In 2017, just 3 days after Christmas, a group of young American men were playing the new Call of Duty game set during World War II. The young men were using a website known as UMG, or Unorganized Management Gaming, in order to organize matches in which there were bets placed. Obviously, whenever money is on the line, even if it is relatively small amounts, intensity and competitiveness go into overdrive. And this is no different when it comes to video games. Two of these gamers named Casey Viner and Shane Gaskill were playing together on the same team when an incident of friendly fire occurred. Due to confusion, frustration, or both, one of the players ended up accidentally eliminating their own teammate from the proceedings. This meant that each man would lose $1.50 that had been placed as a wager. In a distinctly unsportsmanlike follow-up, the two players took to Twitter and began to argue among themselves, each blaming the other for the lost match. This is about the time that Casey Viner threatened to swat Shane Gaskill. Swatting is a criminal harassment tactic of deceiving an emergency service into sending a police and emergency service response team to another person's address. This is triggered by false reporting of a serious law enforcement emergency, such as a bomb threat, murder, hostage situation, or a false report of a mental health emergency, such as reporting that a person is allegedly suicidal or homicidal and may or may not be armed. The term derives from the law enforcement unit SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics, a specialized type of police unit in many countries carrying military-style equipment such as door-breaching weapons, submachine guns, automatic rifles, and sniper rifles. A threat may result in the evacuations of schools and businesses, or sometimes even grave consequences. Like many of you, Shane Gaskill was very familiar with the concept of swatting as a phenomenon with an almost decade-long history. He was never about to give away his actual address, but he also didn't quite believe that Casey Viner had it in him to commit such a destructive, irresponsible act, so he simply called his bluff. Gaskill gave Viner an address in Wichita, Kansas, and that had an element of truth to it, since it was a residence that Gaskill and his family had previously called home, 1033 West McCormick Street. As it turns out, Gaskill was right. Viner didn't have the mental facilities to swat his one-time teammate, but he knew someone who would. Tyler Raj Barris was 25 years old and technically homeless at the time of the incident. He was known throughout online gaming communities as Swatistic, a portmanteau of the acronym SWAT and the word autistic. But Barris was also known to law enforcement for quite another reason, as he had once served 16 months in the LA County Jail for making false bomb threats against local TV stations, elementary schools, and middle schools throughout the greater LA area. He was wanted by police in Florida for calling approximately 30 other bomb threats, and also wanted up in Canada on fraud and mischief charges, as well as for online harassment of a woman in Calgary. Using a system known as Voice over IP, Barris was able to use the free Wi-Fi provided by a South Los Angeles library to call the Wichita Police Department. This is a crucial piece of information in what unfolded, given that the Voice over IP technique used by Barris meant that the call would be transferred from southern LA to Wichita City Hall, meaning that from the perspective of the dispatcher in question, the call appeared to be coming from the city of Wichita itself. There was absolutely no reason to suspect the call's authenticity, as there may have been if it was evident that the call came from California. Barris, identifying himself as Brian and claiming he was calling from 1033 West McCormick Street, went on to tell the dispatcher that he had fatally shot his father and that he was holding family members at gunpoint. He asked if police were coming to the house, saying that he'd already poured gasoline all over the house and was threatening to set it on fire. Over 1,000 miles away in Wichita, local police officers scrambled into action. It is unclear why the city's actual SWAT team wasn't called into action, but the most likely explanation is, given that the seemingly urgent nature of Barris's call, senior officers made the call to simply get to the scene as quickly as was physically possible. Any later, and the fictional Brian might set about burning his own family alive, and so a handful of police officers who were not SWAT team members and therefore untrained for tactical situations or hostage rescues responded to Barris's call, then surrounded the house at 1033 West McCormick Street. Meanwhile, inside the house, 28-year-old father of two Andrew Finch was going about his evening as normal. The Finch family were no strangers to tragedy. Just a few years prior, Andrew's sister had died suddenly in a horrific car accident that had left Andrew as a guardian of her teenage daughter. That might seem like enough heartbreak to last a lifetime, but that night, tragedy would once again visit itself upon the Finch family. Andrew, the man of the house, always took his role as his niece's guardian very seriously, and upon hearing a noise outside in the street, went out to investigate. To his utter shock, he was then greeted by red and blue flashing lights, unable to see the men who had screamed at him to show them his hands. One can only imagine the terror and confusion experienced by Andrew Finch that night. The contradictory emotions of knowing those heavily armed cops were screaming at him, yet knowing full well that he hadn't done anything remotely illegal. However, Finch knew the only rational thing to do in that situation would indeed be to comply with the officer's demands and raise his empty hands calmly and slowly. Yet for some unknown reason, Finch didn't throw his arms all the way up. It's very likely that he was turning to tell the other members of his family to stay indoors, since it was already an obviously tense and dangerous situation. But this would later prove to be a fatal mistake, as police officers later stated that his movement appeared to mimic that of retrieving a firearm from a hip holster. A single shot was fired from a police-issued AR-15 assault rifle, one which pierced Andrew Finch's heart and right lung. He collapsed right there on the porch, a steady flow of blood pumping from the hole in his chest. Finch's traumatized family members were forced to step over his bleeding body as the police then ordered them out of the house. Andrew Finch was driven to Via Christi Hospital St. Francis, but he was pronounced dead on arrival. To the attending officers, they had done their job almost perfectly, defusing a dangerous hostage situation in mere seconds and rescuing all vulnerable parties. But that could not have been further from the truth. As police questioned Finch's family members down at the station, the truth began to come out. In the aftermath of the shooting, very outraged Wichita residents used the opportunity of a city council meeting on January 9th to voice concerns on the subject. They questioned the release of only 7 seconds of the police body cam footage, and they argued that the city should assume full responsibility to avoid a lengthy struggle by the Finch family for justice. The council did not comment directly, but indicated a willingness to consider training procedures at a later time. Nearly a week later, Andrew Finch's mother Lisa wrote to the Wichita mayor and the police chief, stating that she didn't know where her son's body was being kept at, and that she wanted to give him a proper funeral service and burial. "Please, let me see my son's lifeless body," she wrote in a letter dated January 3rd. In the same letter, Mr. Finch asked why the police officer who had killed her son had not at the time been identified, why the family was handcuffed in the immediate aftermath, and when the police will return their belongings, including 2 cell phones and a computer seized from the house. The family attorney Andrew M. Stroth has also called for the city, the police department, as well as the officer involved in the shooting to be held liable for the unjustified shooting of Andrew Finch. On December 29th, just a day after the Wichita swatting incident, Tyler Raj Barris was arrested in Los Angeles on a fugitive warrant stemming from a 2015 charge of making false bomb threats to KABC, a local TV station. He was then charged with false alarm, which happens to be a federal offense. In the investigation that followed, it was discovered that Barris was responsible for potentially hundreds of swatting incidents all over the country. It wasn't long before investigators discovered a connection between him and the Wichita swatting incident. Communication channels were opened between the California and Kansas state governments, and on January 12, 2018, Barris was extradited to Kansas, where he was charged with involuntary manslaughter and was held in Sedgwick County Jail. As the extent of Barris's criminal activity was being unearthed, investigators turned their attention to the police officer who had fired the fatal shot. Justin Rapp, a 7-year veteran of the force, was identified as the officer who had killed Andrew Finch. Attending court in May of 2018, Officer Rapp testified that he had been given absolutely no information when he arrived at the scene, including when Finch was given his first verbal command when the 911 call had ended, or whether officers at the scene were aware that the caller was still on the phone with 911. Sedgwick County Department of Emergency Communications has also denied an open records request pertaining to the 911 call, stating that the police department had asked that no more records be released. It was clear that despite firing the shot that killed Andrew Finch, Justin Rapp was simply just doing his job. If the hostage situation had been a genuine one in which Finch was indeed threatening to kill his family, Rapp would have legitimately been a hero. It was only because of malicious intent on the part of a complete stranger that the shooting even occurred in the first place. As a result of these testimonies, the Sedgwick County District Attorney Mark Bennett has announced that no charges would be brought against Officer Justin Rapp. On May 23, 2018, Tyler Barris, Casey Viner, and Shane Gaskill were indicted in the United States District Court for the District of Kansas on charges related to the swatting. Viner was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to make false and hoax reports, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. In April 2019, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Then, more than a year later in September 2019, he received a 15-month prison sentence in addition to 2 years probation, during which time he would be banned from playing video games. Gaskill was charged with obstruction of justice, wire fraud, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. However, in July of 2018, as his trial unfolded, a horrifying revelation was revealed to the court when it was announced that Gaskill had encouraged Barris to try again. Apparently completely undeterred by the death of Andrew Finch on the night of the 28th of December, Gaskill gloated that he had not been successfully swatted. This could have easily caused yet more deaths in what was a pathetically petty war of words between two man-children. Gaskill's case was originally scheduled to go trial April 23, 2019. If convicted on all charges, he was facing over 60 years in prison. In September 2019, it was reported that Gaskill had struck a deal for deferred prosecution that could allow the charges against him to be dropped. For the previous two defendants, the charges only really reflected their involvement in the Wichita swatting incident. But for Barris, the arrest led to his entire criminal past coming back to haunt him. He was charged with false information and hoaxes, cyberstalking resulting in death, making threats of death or damage to property by fire, interstate threats, conspiracy to make false reports, and wire fraud. However, on October 26, 2018, a whopping 46 additional charges against Barris were added. That included financial fraud and fake threats of bombs and shootings made to police and schools. Some of these charges involved unindicted co-conspirators residing in Illinois, Florida, Michigan, and Missouri. Just 2 weeks later, on November 13th, he pleaded guilty to 51 federal charges. Under the terms of his plea agreement, Barris has also been required to formally apologize to Finch's family and pay $10,000 in fines and restitution, and he's agreed to 5 years of supervised release. On March 29, 2019, Barris was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The sentence includes 150 months imprisonment for the Kansas case and 90 months imprisonment for the federal charges in California to be served consecutively, and then 30 months in prison for Washington, D.C. bomb threats to be served concurrently. No officer was charged with a crime for the event, but the tragedy didn't end there. On the 9th of January 2019, Adelina Finch, the daughter of Andrew Finch's deceased sister who entered her uncle's guardianship after her mother's death, shot herself in a South Wichita apartment. Andrew's mother, Lisa Finch, said that she blames her granddaughter's suicide attempt on the events of that fateful December evening when Andrew was shot to death by the Wichita police. Because Adelina was made to step over his dying body and she had to hear him breathe. And she's been going downhill ever since, Lisa Finch said. She didn't know how to handle it. She's internalized everything. And if somebody even mentions Andy's name, she withdraws and walks out of the room. She hasn't been able to deal with it. I guess this was the way she was dealing with it, she said. Adelina Finch had been a certified nursing assistant and wanted to get more education to become a registered nurse. But thanks to the trauma inflicted by Tyler Barris and others' involvement in the swatting incident, her aspirations would never be realized. Numerous pieces of legislation have been passed in recent years to prevent such incidents from ever occurring again. Some police officers have gone as far as training their dispatchers to be able to recognize hoax calls and the kind of people likely to attempt them. But let's be honest here. Passing laws has never been able to suppress the desire or ingenuity of people who simply want to hurt their fellow man. In 2015, I was 19 and working for the summer at a Bible camp for inner city kids. I'm going to leave out the city name, but just know that obviously crime occurs frequently in big cities, and this one was no different. I had been assured that this neighborhood, however, was in the process of being gentrified, and that they had even just opened up a hipster coffee shop and dog park right down the street. Just to give you a really clear visual, the neighborhood had dilapidated houses with trash out in the front right next to the houses with immaculate yards and square modern architecture. The Bible camp where I was working was essentially just a huge 2-story house with a large fenced-in yard. Again, we were assured that we were safe though because we had bars on the windows and the outer doors locked automatically when they shut. The camp was conducted downstairs, and the summer counselors, which there were 4 of us, lived in the small upstairs that was off limits during the day to the kids. Our camp ran 5 days a week, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and then the time was ours to explore the city. That or rest, or really whatever we wanted to do. That's probably enough to get to the story now. I love a good setting, and it could be important later. One weekend night in July, we were all just hanging out in the house making a spaghetti dinner. We each got our own stipend for food, so we divided it accordingly for meals, then bought our own snacks and shit. We were also in charge of preparing lunch and snacks for the kids on camp days, so we had 2 fridges and 2 pantries. As you can probably guess, we labeled them camp fridge and pantry, and one is labeled staff fridge and pantry. We were also super petty, and we wrote all of our names all over our snacks in the fridge. My best friend worked at the camp with me. We'll call her Chris, and it was our turn to cook that night. So I went to the staff fridge to grab the ground beef. I immediately noticed that my case of Go-Gurts is gone. They were my go-to snack, and I bought like 3 cases a week. I had just opened my last box like an hour before to have one, and I left it right in front of the ground beef. It sounds crazy, but I knew I did. I closed the fridge door and head to the dining room, Chris closely behind me, and then yell at everyone else. "Alright, who stole all my Go-Gurt?" That night, in addition to Chris and myself, there were the other 2 summer counselors, 2 permanent counselors that lived in the area, and then the cousin of one of the permanent counselors. Everyone looked at me wide-eyed, then looked around blankly. I figured it was the cousin because I had never met her before, so I just sucked it up and said, "Whatever. Just if it has the name on it, please don't eat it." Then pull Chris back in the kitchen to finish up the spaghetti. We all eat dinner, and then the 2 permanent counselors volunteered to do the dishes because we let them eat with us. The rest of us head back upstairs to get comfy in the sitting room on the couches and then turn on Family Guy. We're only like 2 minutes in when the cousin will call Sarah, then says, "Wait, I can't find my phone or wallet." I pause the show and roll my eyes, still annoyed about the Go-Gurt. Chris says, "Where did you last have them?" And Sarah says she left them on the couch before we went downstairs to dinner. Naturally, we all start looking around the small room, turning over couch cushions, looking under the couches, behind them, under blankets, and really wherever. Finally, we're like, "Are you sure you didn't leave them downstairs?" She agrees to head downstairs to look with the other 2, and Chris and I go into our room, which is connected to the sitting room. We flop down on the bottom of our bunk bed, and I proceed to talk shit about Sarah, who I feel like is ruining our chill night. Our door is open, and I'm shocked when I see a hand kind of sneak into view like it's going to grab the door frame. I then say, "Hey, did you find them?" Thinking that Sarah or the other 2 have somehow made it back upstairs without me hearing them and have heard me talk shit for the past 5 minutes. But then the hand immediately disappears out of the door frame, and there's no response. I look at Chris like, "What the fuck?" And she's looking back at me confused because she never saw the hand. I quickly explain what happened, and then we both jump up and head to the top of the stairs. We yell down for the others, and they yell back that they haven't found them yet. By this point, I'm freaked the fuck out because who the hell is up here with us? Of course, we're those people though, and we start looking around upstairs in our bedroom, the other bedroom, and in the sitting room, and we find nothing and no one. We decided not to say anything yet because I might sound insane. And also, how could someone have gotten downstairs so fast without us hearing them? When we get downstairs, Sarah is super upset and crying. Her cousin then says, "Come on guys, did someone take her stuff?" But Chris and I both know that we didn't, and we say so. Sarah screams that obviously someone took them and we should just be honest, and then things get really heated. I finally decided to then tell them about the hand because I feel like maybe it'll reduce the tension between us. It does, but then everyone panics. We run around the house like maniacs looking in every closet or hiding place that the kids use and find nothing and no one. We end up calling our cam director to come over because the situation has just evolved into chaos. When he gets there, we're all just sitting huddled in the foyer freaked out, and we then explain what we can. He just doesn't seem convinced that someone was in the house and threatens to call the cops if one of us doesn't give Sarah back her things. Well, none of us fess up, so he calls the cops. Well, they come over and search the property and then take our statements. It seems so dumb as we repeat our stories, but we didn't have much to go off of but a feeling. They do write up a report for stolen property, and that makes Sarah feel better at least. With the house now secure, everyone leaves except for us 4 summer counselors who live there. We all spend the night in the same room with the door barricaded, reassuring ourselves that we're being stupid and the phone and wallet will actually turn up somewhere random and we'll just laugh about it. Fast forward a few days. We've all now relaxed a bit. We still haven't found Sarah's things like we expected, but nothing else weird has happened. And we've been occupied with the kids and the job in general. The kids have all gone home at this point, and it's now just the 4 of us again at the house. We finish cleaning up the outside and lock the gate, and then head in the dining room door. We're all hungry and want snacks. Chris gets to the kitchen first and then says, "Someone left the kitchen door open again." I mean, it's kinda weird, but kids go in and out that door all day, so of all the doors to be open, this is the least weird. She shuts it, and then I noticed the staff fridge door is also cracked open. Then who knows what possessed me, but I go, "Oh no y'all, he's back." We all then laugh because we just think this is ridiculous. Chris grabs a broom, holds it as a weapon, and then says, "Let's get 'em, girls." She starts to throw open the pantry door, screaming, "Where the fuck are you, motherfucker? And we know you're in here. Show yourself." I'm following behind her laughing, but I start to inexplicably feel uneasy and nervous. She continues her charade into the next room, throwing open 2 more closet doors. Then she moves into the front room and opens that closet door. She starts another confident rant. "We know you're here." When she stops mid-sentence and screams so loudly, skin on my neck prickles. Then she throws the broom in the closet and sprints out the front door, leaving it open. My heart is now pounding so fucking hard at this point, but I'm thinking she's just messing with us. So I turn around and go the other way into the foyer and out the front door. I see her booking it down the street towards the coffee shop, and I'm just like, okay, what is she doing? As soon as I turn back around to find the others, he's just there. An older man who looks really dirty and has hardly any teeth. He's just grinning at me. He has his hands up and says,
"I didn't mean no harm,"
while slowly backing away down the street in the other direction. It's so creepy because even though he says this, it's like he doesn't mean it. It's like his tone and the grin are mocking me. I'm frozen for a second, then I sputter out, "You can't just, leave." And he just says again with that same damn grin,
"I didn't mean no harm,"
then turns and runs. I fumble in my pocket for my phone and tell 911, then go to follow him. But as soon as I reach the edge of the house, he's gone. The next events are kind of a blur. Sounds wild, but we really all thought we just freaked ourselves out. No way in hell did we actually think someone was in the house. The cops took our statements and reminded us that we needed to keep the door shut at all times no matter what. Our director apologized profusely for not initially believing us. My parents wanted me to come back home for the remainder of the summer, But I was just like, hey, what else could really happen? Chris was the one who had it the worst. She was absolutely terrified to stay in that house. She told me later that when she opened the door, he was grinning at her with dead eyes, like he was waiting for her to finally find him. She said that she will never forget his face. We're still best friends at almost 30, and I can't bring up that summer to her if she hasn't been drinking. That's basically it. I think what kept me up at night after that were just the unanswered questions. Like, how long had he been in the house? Why did he randomly decide to take the phone and wallet of the one person who didn't work there? Had he listened to our private conversations? Watched us get dressed and shower? How much food had he stolen that we didn't notice? Where the fuck had he gone when we were looking for him on spaghetti night? What hiding places did we miss? Was he under my bed at night or at any point during my stay? I don't know all these answers, and I know I'll never have them, but I'm thankful our interaction wasn't worse, I guess. I'm feeling really scared right now, and I could use some advice. This is a bit of a long story, so bear with me. A few months ago, this guy started showing up at my favorite coffee shop. At first, he seemed nice enough. We had a few casual conversations, but it was clear he was interested in more than just being friends. He asked me out a couple of times, and each time I politely declined. I even mentioned that I have a girlfriend, hoping he'd get the hint. My girlfriend and I have been together for 3 years, and we're really happy. I thought he would respect that, but instead, things took a turn for the worse. After I rejected him for the 3rd time, I had started noticing him everywhere. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe we just liked the same places. But then it got weird. He'd be at the grocery store when I was shopping, at the park when my girlfriend and I were taking a walk, and even outside my apartment building. I tried to brush it off as paranoia. A few weeks ago, my girlfriend and I were at the park. It was a beautiful day and we were just enjoying each other's company. I saw the same guy in the distance and my heart sank. I tried to ignore him. That night, I got a message on Instagram from an obviously fake account. It was a video of us at the park with a message that said something creepy like,
"Cute couple. Shame one of you is with the wrong person."
We were both freaked out. I reported the account and blocked it, but videos kept coming. Different accounts, different angles. Since then, I've stopped going out as much, and when I do, I always feel like I'm being watched. My girlfriend tries to be strong for the both of us, but I can tell she's scared too. We've talked about moving or calling the police, but we're both unsure. Has anyone else dealt with something like this? How did you handle it? Any advice on what we should do next? I just want to feel safe again. I'm from France, and it happened 6 years ago when I was 20. So I came home after sleeping at my boyfriend's place. It was like 8 a.m. Super early because my boyfriend started his shift and my parents were already gone like an hour earlier. So I was alone at home and I knew it. So I came home and I directly went to my bedroom to continue my day. But before climbing the stairs, I saw that the kitchen door and window was wide open. I was surprised, but I didn't think I was in any danger since, I was inside my own house. You have to know that my father is super paranoid, and there's no way he could have forgotten to close the windows before leaving the house for 2 weeks, even if I stayed, because I used to sleep in my boyfriend's house most of the time. But I was barely awake, so I just closed the door. I checked the kitchen and the living room just to be sure, and then go up to my room. There are 3 rooms on the 2nd floor. I went to my room to change, then I went to the bathroom and then returned back to my room. I'm not sure why I did this because I usually never do this, but for whatever reason, I decided to close my door. I was scrolling on my phone, and like 5 minutes later, I heard what sounded like footsteps right behind my door. Someone was there the whole time while I was just going about in my room, completely vulnerable. I was terrified. My heart dropped into my stomach and I couldn't move. I took the first thing in front of me to defend myself, my Babyliss. I stared at my door, waiting for the person to open up and kill me, or worse. I was ready to jump out the window and die if I had seen the door open. But minutes passed and I heard the person on the stairs. I don't know how long I stayed there immobile, but eventually I called my boyfriend and he came over to my rescue. At first, I thought I was crazy because I didn't actually see anything, and I couldn't believe that it even really happened. But my boyfriend confirmed that they forced the door and windows in the kitchen, so they really were there. They were silently waiting for me to sleep before leaving my house. I thought I was home alone, feeling safe, only I wasn't. It was very traumatic. I can barely stay alone somewhere without freaking out now. I live alone and I'm constantly afraid that someone's trying to break in. But the worst part is that they didn't even take anything. My mom's MacBook and jewelry, my PS4, my dad's gaming setup. Everything was so easy to take, but they didn't. I can't stop thinking that they were here for another reason. You also have to know that at the time I was very active on Snapchat. I used to post every day, and I used to always post just about every part of my day on my Snapchat story. So my 5K followers that I had on social media knew everything about me at this time. Since then, I stopped all of my activities on Snapchat. I guess I just want some feedback from others. Do you think it's related to my Snapchat? Or was it something else entirely? In early March of 2013, my husband and I were driving back from a marriage retreat that had been held at the Hyatt Regency in Lake Tahoe. Spring approached slowly, so snow still blanketed the Sierra Nevadas, and we dressed in coats and boots when we ventured outside of our hotel during the retreat. Still, with the snow thawing out slowly, we enjoyed viewing the occasional greenish foliage peeking out from the thick layer of snow among the tree lines, as well as the towering embankments of the Sierras. It made for the perfect landscape pictures, the kind you may find on desk calendars or stock photos sold online. We had enjoyed the marriage retreat and relished in the experience of staying at a 5-star hotel, and now we were given the privilege to drive through the most breathtaking parts of the Sierras. A final treat as we headed home and back to the work week. So we had to take pictures, or rather my husband had to. Not that I don't enjoy a photo or two. I do, but he always insists on a picture of us and a picture of me, and I'm not photogenic. Always when we traveled, he would stop the car, get out to take photos, and then subject us to ugly photos of ourselves that we'd probably end up deleting from our phone later on anyway. Fortunately, we would get the occasional gold nugget of a photo, and that's what he was striving for on our trip down the mountain on that day. So I obliged, allowing him to relish in his photo taking of the landscape of him and me, even though I was pretty sure I looked atrocious. There were several vista points and turnoffs along the Highway 80 for picture taking. We just had to be cautious when pulling off the highway since the road twisted around cliffs and embankments. And even though the weather conditions didn't require snow chains this particular weekend, we knew the roads could still be dangerous and slippery. Some of these vista points were just off the side of the highway, but these vista points could appear quickly when we drove around a bend, and we didn't want a chance sliding across the road in an attempt to stop. Other vista points required us to actually exit the highway and drive a short distance away, and these were more plausible for my husband's photo escapades. We took one such exit on our descent through the mountains. The exit took us on a short road that dipped under the highway and over to a clearing with a field bristling with bushes devoid of foliage, but with the Sierra Mountains in the background, creating a striking contrast of snow-covered mountains against the beautiful blue sky. We could still see the highway to our left, a good 500 yards away, but if we angled our phones away from the highway, we could still capture the beauty of nature in all its glory. Better yet, elements of spring revealed itself with slightly warmer temperatures, so we could take photos without multiple layers of clothing. So we pulled the car to the shoulder, got out of the car, and walked down a slight embankment to get a better photo. I took a photo of my husband and him of me. As we walked back up the embankment toward our car, we had heard a loud noise of a car's motor in the distance. I turned and saw a dark-colored Porsche zoom down the highway rather quickly considering the twisting road, then pull off the exit we had just taken, tear down the road right in front of us, then stop behind our car on the shoulder. It was almost as if the driver was in a hurry. To what, I didn't know, but I figured that the driver had stopped quickly to enjoy the scenery as we did. Maybe snap a photo for himself before rushing to his next rendezvous. Instead, the driver got out of his car and asked us if he could take our picture. What struck me about this younger dude was his appearance. From a distance, he looked homeless, eccentric, like one of those guys living on beaches dressed in worn-out clothes with holes in their pants. He sported a grunge-like look with brownish shaggy hair, the beginnings of a beard displaying itself in patches around his face, and a plaid shirt. But as we walked up to him, in the middle of him asking us that question, we got a closer inspection and noticed he was clean despite his grunge look. Upon a closer look, I got the impression he was a rich kid in his 20s, perhaps someone donning the messy look as his own outcry against society. But getting back to the scene, as we headed back up the embankment toward our car, he asked us in a friendly voice, "Hey guys, would you like a picture?" It wasn't abnormal for us to hear that. Often when you're taking pictures on vacation, you may ask other tourists to take a photo of yourself and your spouse, or someone walking may initiate their photo-taking services, and this exchange took a matter of a few seconds. So we both just said, "Sure, why not?" and handed my phone over for pictures before our brains had time to process that the scenario we found ourselves in was now off. We were the only ones on the road other than this guy and apparently his girlfriend who sat hidden in the shadows in the Porsche's passenger seat and didn't move an inch. By the time Grunge Dude had us take a few steps back down the embankment for the picture, my dumb brain finally kicked in and said, "Hey, something's off here." But by then he had already stepped back toward his car, taking several pictures of us from my phone until he achieved the perfect shot. Though we grinned for the photos, we stood on edge with me wondering, would he take this opportunity to take off with my phone, jump in his car, and speed off? Uneasiness came over me as he continued taking photos, stepping backwards closer to his car a little bit each time. A scene from National Lampoon's European Vacation popped into my mind, one featuring a nice man offering to take a video of the Griswold's characters who had newly arrived in France or Germany or some European country. The Griswolds naively accepted the offer, and the nice old man encouraged them to take off their shoes and stand knee-deep in a plaza fountain for a better video shot. Only the man ran off with their video camera instead. This led to another comical conflict later on in the film, but I wasn't thinking about that. No. I was thinking in those 1 or 2 seconds how much of an idiot I was for letting this guy take my phone to supposedly take pictures. But when he took one last step toward his car, my husband, who had the same uneasiness, then abruptly and quickly took a few steps up the embankment, reached forward, and then quickly took my phone from the man's hands. Thank you, that's good. Those photos will work," he said, laughing off the awkwardness. I joined my husband at his side, and we waved at the Grunge Dude's passenger, who made no effort to look our way. I think my husband even asked if they wanted a picture too, if my memory serves me right, but the Grunge Dude declined, saying his goodbyes to us, got back in his car, then made a U-turn and left. Just like that. And the bizarre thing? When the Grunge Dude originally got off the highway and parked behind us, he'd been driving westbound on Highway 80, the same direction we were. But now as we watched his car tear up the road from us and jump back onto Highway 80, only to head eastbound back toward Lake Tahoe, with the same robust speed as when he had made his appearance. Why had he done this only to turn around? What was his point of taking our photos and then returning from where he'd come from? What was he planning with us? And what had deterred him from going through with it? Was he on drugs? And why hadn't his female companion said anything? And why did he come and leave with such urgency, sporting his car's motor and taking off so quickly? We noted how bizarre this was, but at least the uneasiness had waned, and now I had my phone safely with me. We got back in our car and continued westbound on the highway, Still not sure what to make of this, but we just pushed that out of our mind as we continued to drive down that mountain, maneuvering the twisting, bending roads and admiring the nature around us. But about 20 or so minutes later, the uneasiness returned when we came upon a car accident just around the bend. An upside-down SUV had crashed into the steep cliff to our right. Transit authority and state trooper vehicles tended to the driver while making sure we passed through safely. The incident is unrelated, but something about this and our encounter with the strange grunge dude made us uneasy, tainting the atmosphere, and this unsettling feeling lingered even as we and the other vehicles passed the accident scene slowly. I don't remember if I saw the driver or an ambulance, but I knew the accident was bad if the vehicle had overturned. The unsettling feeling remained with us during the rest of our 3-hour trip back home, but nothing else came of it. So in the end, it was anticlimactic. Still, the encounter with the grunge dude still stuck with us. My husband later said that he had a flashing thought that the guy may pull out a gun on us. I wondered if he was a thief, and maybe for whatever reason decided to not take our phone or valuables. Or a later thought that came was this: what if he wasn't there for malicious reasons, but perhaps a divine intervention? It wasn't that long after this encounter that we happened to stumble on that car accident. Had his picture taking delayed us enough to avoid getting caught in the accident and flipping over ourselves? Or maybe that's my imagination gone wild. Still, the bizarre encounter always remains. I'm a 22-year-old female. I'm about to graduate college with a degree in criminal justice, so all of my classes are based on my degree. Most of them are about learning about government U.S. court systems and the fundamentals of them, criminology, police systems, so on and so forth. But the coolest part of it all is the electives we have at my university for my degree. We have around 7 to 8 different elective criminal justice classes we can take for advanced credits. I've taken sex crimes, which is one of the most interesting and disturbing classes I've taken, and I could write an entire post about one particular story. But my favorite elective class I've taken is my Homeland Security class with Dr. B. Name change for privacy. Dr. B is the type of guy you look at and go, "You were a cop?" Not in a bad way, of course, but with a skinny stature, way of speaking, and thick glasses, it's hard to picture. Dr. B took a liking to me since I was the only girl in that class, let alone the only one who would engage in conversation in class. So one day before finals, I asked him what his most interesting story from being a cop was. Here's the story he told a room of guys and a very interested 20-something kid. It was around mid to late 80s. Dr. B was on patrol with his partner Sam. At the time, he was fresh out of the academy, so you have to have a seasoned officer with you for a certain period of time. Sam had been in for about 15 years, I'd say, so Dr. B was assigned with him. They were patrolling a pretty nice neighborhood when they pulled up to a stop sign and saw a white man in his mid-30s speed walking on the sidewalk. His clothes weren't that of a homeless man, but not the type you'd see in that neck of the woods. Flip-flops, basketball shorts, and a big t-shirt. Sam told Dr. B to follow him. When Dr. B questioned him as to why, Sam replied, "I don't know. I don't have a good feeling though. Just trust me." So they follow him down the sidewalk, flip the lights on, and stop him. Sam and Dr. B get out of the patrol car and begin talking with the man. Dr. B let Sam do most of the talking while he observed his body language. Fidgety but not suspicious, restless almost, but with a calm voice and demeanor. He kept pulling his shorts up and his shirt down, Dr. B noted to us. Sam then asked if there was something the matter with his clothing, to which the man replied that the shorts were a little big. Before Dr. B knew it, Sam had the man on the hood of the car, pinning his hands behind his back and cuffing him. Dr. B started frantically asking what in the world he was doing. When Sam hiked the guy's shirt up, a Glock was in the waistband of the shorts, as well as a bag of what appeared to be cocaine in one of the shorts' pockets. Apparently the guy was a user and had been given a bad deal of drugs. He found out where the dealer lived, and he was going to rob him, or worse. When Dr. B asked Sam how he knew, Sam just said, "I got a bad feeling and just went with my gut." And wouldn't you know, the third time he pulled his shorts up, the gun pressed against the t-shirt. Dr. B said that he never doubted Sam's intuition ever again. I would like to keep my name anonymous for privacy reasons. This happened to me 2 years ago in the beginning of March of 2022. I work the PM shift all the way until the late shift at my job, and I usually get off around 1:30 to 2 a.m. So when I go back driving home, I would usually take a tunnel, which was the quickest way to my house. One night I was casually just driving back home from work, and I took a tunnel that I always take when going home. And from a distance, I saw a car up ahead with their hazard lights on. I assumed this person just stopped because they were probably doing something or having some difficulties with their vehicle, like a flat tire or something. But as I got closer, a hooded man stepped out of the vehicle and then pointed a gun directly at me. I thought quickly and put my car in reverse, and then started reversing the hell out of there as quickly as I could. Kind of like that scene in Too Fast, Too Furious where Brian was driving in the freeway backwards. As I kept reversing quickly, I lost control of my vehicle and crashed the right back side of it on the wall in the tunnel. Luckily for me, my car was still able to keep going, so I put my car back in drive and turned back to where I came from, taking another route back home. Obviously, I was terrified, and I just kept telling myself, "What the fuck?" over and over again on the way back home because of what I had just experienced. Once I got home, I bursted into my room scared and then questioning myself about what the hell just happened. I called the cops telling them about the incident, but unfortunately everything happened so fast that I really couldn't give a good description of the vehicle or how the guy looked due to him wearing a hoodie. I really couldn't believe that happened to me, and I had so many questions about it, like, was that guy looking to rob me? I'm pretty sure he was, because if he really wanted to kill me, he could have easily done so by just simply pulling the trigger once the gun was pointed at me. Or maybe he thought that by simply pointing the gun at me, I was going to be too scared to do anything, so he was going to just walk up to my car and take my phone and wallet. I've told this story to a few of my friends and coworkers. They were in shock too, and they told me I was really lucky. One of them even brought up the theory that what if the gun the guy had was fake? But whether it was fake or not, I wasn't going to stick around to find out. Ever since that night, I've never taken that tunnel back home again. I always take a completely different route now when going back home. I hope that nobody else fell victim to whatever he was planning on doing to me. I didn't hear about anything that happened in that tunnel for the rest of the week, so I assumed that the guy either fled or was possibly caught by a cop. I want to start by saying I've never shared this story, but I've always wanted to. I'll be changing the names and keeping the city I'm in out of the story for safety reasons. So when I was 7, my oldest sister, who we'll call Lily, started dating a guy she met at a club. We knew nothing about him other than he was from Mexico and he was visiting his cousin here in the US. He was very charming. I remember him having blue eyes, blonde hair, and he was extremely tall, which was just my sister's type. My mom didn't really like him, and she would often tell my sister to not get too attached, as he was only here on a 6-month travel visa and would eventually have to go back. My sister was 18 and rebellious, so not only did she become attached, she had asked him to stay past his visa. We live in a sanctuary city, so he agreed to stay. Eventually, she ended up pregnant, dropped out of college, and he moved into our home with us. He was really nice and he always helped financially. He always seemed to have money and was always working in our garage. My mom was a single mom and never used the garage, so we never went in to see what he did in there. Well, eventually he rented out a house a few blocks away from ours, and we were kind of shocked that he had the money for it, because our neighborhood wasn't the cheapest in the city, but it was one of the safest. My mom was happy that they were close, but was also questioning where he got the money for this home. Time passed and it was a Saturday night in the evening, and my sister was pounding on our door with her son. She was also pregnant with her second child. She was flustered and she had dirt all over her arms and clothes. My mama then asked her where her husband was, and that's when she told us that he had been selling drugs for a cartel. Apparently he wasn't giving them the full profit of what he was making, and they found out, so they gave him a week to come up with the money, but he didn't. My sister was feeding her son in his nursery when she heard them break in and begin to beat on her husband. She had her keys and diaper bag in her son's nursery, so she opened up a window and jumped out and then ran to my mom's house with her baby. My mom wanted to call the police, but my sister begged her not to. We also found out that her husband would beat and cheat on her multiple times. We begged her to leave him, and she didn't want to. They ended up moving homes, and the abuse only got worse, as did the cheating. We were really worried for her as she just had her second child, and she had postpartum depression. She also told us that he no longer worked for the cartel, and we didn't believe her, but we knew that we couldn't help her. Some time passed, and eventually my sister told us that they were moving to Mexico. We were in shock. My mom begged her not to go, and I cried to her multiple times, but her mind was made up. We were worried that the abuse would only get worse over there, and that he would continue working for the cartels. We found out that he was using drugs through their entire relationship, and it really worried us so much. The day had came for them to leave, and she took a flight to Mexico with her 2 kids, while he drove to Mexico to do one last job for the cartel. At the time, we had no idea that this was happening, but the day before his drive, he did ask to grab the tools that he had left in our garage, and my mom let him. He took 2 huge duffel bags and left. Well, 2 days later, around 2 a.m., a bunch of masked men came to our home and banged on every window. They were shaking our doors and screaming for us to open up. Immediately, my mom and brother called the cops, but they weren't much help. Our neighbor across the street saw everything happen, and he came out with his rifle and then shot it in the air. He also called the cops as well, but I guess 2 calls was enough to get them to come faster, but not fast enough. I remember shaking after seeing multiple men also had their own guns. Finally, we heard sirens, and all of the men left in their own trucks and sped off. We called my sister to tell her about what happened, and she instantly broke down, telling us that her husband had been storing drugs in our garage as well as money. My mom was extremely pissed off about this, and we started packing our bags to go stay with family. We went from family to family, but it didn't matter because they always found us. For months we were stalked. My sister's husband was nowhere to be found. Whenever we would try to drive back home, they would always show up and just watch us. Life became scary, and the cops wouldn't help us. It was to the point that my mom decided to move us all to her vacation home in Mexico. She first sent my brother over with my sister and her kids, as they were the most anxious. She then began the process of getting my school transcripts. During this time, my mom also sold her truck and got a small car to try and throw off the stalkers, but that didn't work. They had all of my uncle's plates at this point, and they knew where we were. All of my aunts were telling my mom to not move to Mexico. They told her it would die down and they would keep us safe. Well, that same week, we were watching the news as we packed our bags to leave, and my sister's husband's face was on the TV screen. He was an accomplice to murder and cartel ties. What was supposed to be a 3-day job turned into tying loose ends for the cartel that he worked for. We also found out that not only was he not giving the full profit to the cartel, but he was also stealing drugs from them. They told him that they knew where my sister and his kids were, and if he didn't continue to do what they say, they would kill them. Once we saw that he had been put in jail, we postponed our move, and slowly everything went back to normal. We were left alone. My sister continued to live in Mexico with my brother due to anxiety, but the rest of us moved back home. A few months passed and I was playing alone in my backyard when a red pickup truck pulled up in the alley and they tried to take me. This actually happened 3 times. On the 3rd time, the police came on time and were able to arrest the man. He had ties to the cartel that my sister's husband worked for. I'm not really sure what he wanted from me, but this whole situation made me develop long-term PTSD and an anxiety disorder. I now live alone with my daughter, and I have multiple locks and a security system in place. I hate being alone in my mother's house, and I avoid being there at all costs. My sister eventually divorced that man and later remarried, and she's happy and at peace. I think deep down we're all really scared that if Rex comes out of jail, it'll all start again, but I really hope that doesn't happen. I'm 22 years old now. We used to have a neighbor who was around 60 to 70 years old. He died a few years ago. When he was still alive, however, he would cause us so much trouble. Scratched our car, poisoned our apple trees and grass, and he also blew up a firework near me to cause me to temporarily go deaf in one ear when I was 4 years old. All kinds of things. His son was a judge in our city, so pretty much everything we took to court was against us. I remember my dad often called us from work to tell us not to be alone at home and that we would have to stay at grandma's. When I was little, I think around 6 to 7, I would frequently have nightmares about seeing a face outside of the bathroom window. The window is above our bathtub. It's high enough that no one can actually see it unless they climb the roof of our shed, which is underneath the bathroom window in our garden. Coincidentally, the shed is directly next to a fence that separates our garden from the neighbors. I still remember the dreams. I remember having them pretty much every other night. I never told my parents when I was little because we never really talked about anything, so I didn't really share anything that was happening to me. Well, I grew up thinking they were just dreams and that was it. I did mention them to my therapist last year because we were discussing some personal problems, and I felt like this was kinda connected. After coming home, my mom had asked me what I talked about with my therapist, so I finally shared that I used to have such dreams. I never really thought about them being real, but she told me that I actually did tell her that I saw our neighbor on our shed's roof. I don't remember telling her that, but she said that I did mention it several times. And even my friends told her that they saw him there when they came over to our house and it creeped them out. Apparently, I never mentioned him watching me shower. But after she told me that, it really clicked for me. And it was as if I suddenly remembered that yeah, I do think it was him. It would make sense. And the fact that it happened still creeps me out. There was another incident that also creeped me out. It happened when I was around 9 to 10. I went to the balcony in the evening. The balcony door was in my room, and I often went there to call my cat home in the evening. But this time I saw a person standing in the middle of our garden. It was already dark out, and I couldn't really tell who it was. I waited for a little bit to see what the person did, but I didn't really see him move. It was as if he was just standing and staring in front of him. I then called out, "Dad?" Because obviously I expected it to be him, even though I found it odd. But then the person looked up at me, and even though it was dark, I could still tell it was someone else. I think it was partly because my eyes had just adjusted to the dark, and I could make out the silhouette of the person better. Well, I went to go tell my dad who was downstairs, but when he looked, there was no one there. When I went back upstairs to my room and went to the balcony again, I noticed my neighbor's back door closing just when I looked there. I don't remember if it was directly the next day or a few days later, but our grass turned brown and we found out it was poisoned, most of the grass being out of reach from his property. I'm a 35-year-old single mother of 3, and this just happened to me a few years ago. It was a chilly evening with the sun dipping low over the horizon as I then pulled into our quiet suburban neighborhood after a quick trip to the gas station. The tank was now full, but a sense of uneasiness settled over me as I then parked in our driveway. I glanced around, noticing the usual calm of the street, yet something felt off to me. As I gathered my purse and keys, I then caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye. A figure quickly ducking behind a nearby hedge. My heart skipped a beat, nerves tingling as I hurried to unlock the front door. The house felt way too quiet, too empty, and I shivered despite the warmth from the inside. I quickly checked on my 3 children, Timmy, Emily, and little Jake, all safe thankfully, and lost in their evening cartoons. They were oblivious to the unease that was gripping me. I tried to shake off the feeling, just chalking it up to a stressful day and just an overactive imagination. But as I glanced out the window, a shadow darted across the yard, confirming my worst fears. The figure was tall and dark, blending into the gathering dusk. Panic surged through me, adrenaline kicking in as I locked the doors and drew the curtains. Every sound outside amplified in my ears. The creak of the porch steps, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I started debating with myself on whether or not to call the police, but I hesitated, unsure if I was overreacting. Hours passed with a tense silence, broken only by the occasional distant car passing by in my neighborhood. I finally managed to coax the children to bed, their innocent sleep a stark contrast to my racing dark thoughts. I tiptoed back downstairs, trying to reassure myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks. Surely I'm just tired and paranoid, right? Well, then came a soft tapping at the living room window. My heart leaped into my throat. I crept closer, peering out cautiously. There, standing in the shadows, was Mr. Johnson from 2 houses down, a man in the neighborhood known for his odd behavior and intense stares. His eyes were fixed on me, a creepy and cold smile spreading across his face. I stumbled back in horror, knocking over a lamp that crashed to the floor. The noise had startled Mr. Johnson, but instead of retreating, he seemed emboldened. He gestured for me to come closer, his demeanor unsettlingly calm.
"Come out, dear,"
he called in a low, coaxing voice.
"I just want to talk."
Fear paralyzed me as I fumbled for my phone, my fingers now trembling over the emergency dial. Mr. Johnson's expression darkened, his movements becoming more urgent. He paced along the edge of my yard, muttering to himself in a way that sent chills down my spine. Just as I dialed 911, I heard a loud crash from the back of the house. My heart pounded as I realized he was now trying to break into my house. Without hesitation, I bolted upstairs, bursting into the children's room to scoop them into my arms. We all just huddled together in the closet, my phone pressed to my ear as I whispered urgently to the dispatcher. Minutes felt like hours as we waited in terrified silence, my little ones crying and confused. Then finally, I heard it. The sirens in the distance beginning closer and closer. I was now safe. Mr. Johnson vanished into the darkness just as the police car screeched to a stop outside our house. Officers flooded the area, searching for any sign of the intruder. They found him. Mr. Johnson was lurking in the bushes at the edge of our property, his face twisted in a mixture of defiance and derangement. He was arrested and taken away, but the fear lingered long after. I went through the process of getting a restraining order, but I ultimately decided to just move somewhere new as well. So that's what I did. We moved to a much safer area where I could raise my children without the haunting specter of our creepy neighbor. Even now, years later, I can't seem to forget the terror of that night, the feeling of being watched, the fear for my children's safety. It's a story that I rarely tell people, but one that serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkest threats can lurk just beyond our own front doors.